Chapter 1490. In order to achieve this goal as well as to increase their chances of winning, Yang Qindong had sent out the most elite Black Knights, the Dragon Guards. It seemed that everything was normal, but for some reason Ivan always had a feeling that everything was going too smoothly. Alating's departure, the military operation plan was leaked, and even now most of the guards around him were withdrawn. Yang Qindong seemed to be telling him, "Do you want to harm me? Do you want to make a move? Then come quickly, there won't be such a shop after this village." Since things were going too smoothly, Ivan felt a little unconfident. He had thought about it carefully. It seemed that everything that happened was so natural, and it seemed that it was because of his own efforts that this ending appeared. Wasn't this what he wanted? Then what was there to hesitate about? The most taboo thing for those who wanted to achieve great things was to be decisive. If it was very likely that victory would be brushed aside. So after thinking about it, Ivan decided to give it a try, because he was also worried about whether there would be a chance after this time. Especially once the 5-star army on the east and west sides converged, he was afraid that at that time he, as an external general, would not have a chance to get close to Yang Qindong. At that time, how could he talk about revenge? It won't be a trap. Our plan is very thorough. Like this, don't do anything, act as usual, we just need to make a move when it's the most appropriate time. Ivan said carefully. He couldn't guarantee that no one among the 500 palace guards had secretly become Yang Qindong's spies. So except for these few people he trusted, before the matter was done, he wouldn't reveal a trace of information. Hearing Ivan's answer, Korea was relieved. Although their master was very young, he was an existence that even the Grand Duke of Blindness often praised. The 5-star army's attack began. Before the Ilkhanate was fully prepared, the first echelon of Air Force hot air balloons rose into the air and flew straight to the target. Not only could they play the role of Air Force reconnaissance, but they could also play the role of air bombers when they encountered a dense group of enemies. With the help of the engines, the hot air balloons moved faster and faster. Soon, hundreds of hot air balloons filled the entire sky above the battlefield. At this time, Harsinhan of the Ilkhanate was also mobilizing his army. Relying on the information brought back by Alting, he began to launch a counterattack against the 5-star army. Under Ha Linhan's command, 80,000 cavalrymen were sent to various locations on the battlefield. The pale-faced Alating also came to the central tent. When he saw that the Great Khan had only sent out 80,000 cavalry, he asked with a puzzled look, "The cavalry of the other countries haven't arrived yet. How long has it been?" "No. They all arrived 3 days ago." Harsin Khan smiled proudly. This time, in order to support the Ilkhanate, the reinforcements sent by the other Ilkhanates arrived on time. With 300,000 cavalrymen in his hand, he had a great feeling that no one in the world could compete with him. Listening to Harsin Khan's proud answer, this time it was Alating's turn to have a puzzled look. If that's the case, why didn't the Great Khan send out the army to block the 5-star army's attack direction and seize the initiative? "Oh, no hurry, let's wait and see first," Harsin Khan said slowly. Obviously, he didn't completely believe the information that Alating exchanged with his life, and he also didn't believe the young man who was supposed to be the heir of the Ross Principality. After hearing this, Alating's face turned red. However, he didn't know what to say. After all, he couldn't guarantee that Ivan was telling the truth. If there were any discrepancies, it would involve the lives of 300,000 cavalrymen. Even if he killed himself, he wouldn't be able to bear the responsibility. As expected, the commander of the alliance, Great Khan Harsin Khan, didn't completely believe the information that Ivan said. When the news was sent back, Yang Qindong let out a sigh of relief. This gave him more time to adjust his strategy. When Harsin Khan found out that Ivan's information wasn't wrong, he would definitely send out all his troops. This way the 5-star army's revised attack plan could be put to use. At that time, it would be time to deal a heavy blow to the enemy and obtain victory. At this moment, Yang Qindong could almost see the scene of victory. But what he didn't know was that danger was surrounding him. 20 miles to the left of the 5-star Legion Corps, a force of 30,000 Mongol cavalry was hiding in a dense forest. Just from the fact that these cavalrymen were holding grass in their hands, their horses were wrapped in their hooves, and the fact that 30,000 people were piled up together without making a single sound, one could tell that this was an extremely elite cavalry force. If Yang Qindong was here, he would be able to recognize at a glance that the leader of this group of generals was the one who had disappeared for a long time, the one who once had an illustrious reputation on the grassland, Master Tolos. This was a group of elite Mongolian cavalrymen led by Yeshen. Ever since they were defeated and forced to leave, Yeshen brought 60,000 cavalrymen and escaped from the 5-star army's line of sight. In order to hide their tracks, they were very careful along the way. They passed through dense forests and walked through deserts. They would go wherever there were fewer people. Furthermore, in order to make the five-star army forget about them, they would hide wherever there was human habitation. Sometimes, in order to avoid people, they would take a detour of tens or even hundreds of li to completely hide their tracks. It had to be said that Yeshen's way of doing things really made the Yangtze intelligence department lose track of them. As a result, they settled down in a deserted area in the desert and stayed there for 5 years. Although the place they chose was remote, there were water plants and it was a good place to graze. With such a place to rest, Yeshen's tribe began to slowly heal their wounds. If nothing unexpected happened, perhaps they would become strong again in 20 years. At that time, it would be time for them to take revenge on the five-star army. Of course, the sky was full of unforeseen winds and clouds, and man's fate was uncertain. One day Yeshen drank a lot of wine in his tent and coughed up blood. After the wizard's examination, he was told that his body was sick and that he only had a year to live at most. These words were like a bolt from the blue, causing Yeshen's face to turn pale. After that, he locked himself in his tent for 3 days. In these 3 days he didn't see a single person. Apart from eating and drinking, he didn't talk to anyone. On the 4th day he walked out of his tent and made a decision. He wanted to find Yang Qindong and take revenge. He wanted to use the last year of his life to complete his life's greatest goal. Just like this, apart from leaving behind a few youths to General Buru to protect their homeland and reproduce, he chose the most elite 30,000 people. With Bo Muir, one of the 4 great generals, as his deputy, they walked out of the desert and embarked on the journey to find Yang Qindong. Since last autumn, they had walked out of the desert and searched for Yang Qindong's whereabouts. As the days passed, Yeshen had his own worries. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to find Yang Qindong in his last days. If that happened, he wouldn't have any hope of revenge. Even if he died, he wouldn't be able to rest in peace. Perhaps the heavens didn't disappoint those who were willing. Finally, the cavalry scouts sent back news that Yang Qindong had appeared. He appeared in the region west of the Ilkhanate. When he heard this news, Yeshen's eyes couldn't help but shed tears. That was a sign of his excitement. After that, he led the 30,000 cavalrymen to the back of the five-star army's main camp. The news from the cavalry scouts had once made Yeshen feel discouraged. When he heard that Yang Qindong had brought 400,000 cavalry, he thought that he had no hope of revenge. After all, 30,000 against 400,000, and they were the elites of the five-star army, he had no chance of victory. However, yesterday he suddenly received news that the five-star army had set out, splitting into more than 10 groups to kill their way towards the Ilkhanate. Yeshen once again knelt on the ground. He wanted to thank the heavens for giving him this opportunity for revenge. In particular, when he found out that his target Yang Qindong's commander flag was still in the central camp and hadn't moved. He didn't follow his subordinates to the front lines. He knew that his chance had come. Leader, should we send someone to scout? It would be best if we can confirm that Yang Qindong is indeed in the central camp before we make our move. That way it would be safer. Deputy General Bo Muir gave his opinion in an experienced manner. We don't have time. Yeshen shook his head and rejected this suggestion. He didn't know when the five-star army would return after setting out. What if they didn't wait for the right opportunity and the other party's main force returned? If that was the case, wouldn't he be wasting this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Yeshen didn't want to regret anymore. He decided to give it a try even if it didn't work. Even if they all died here, at least he had worked hard and fought for his goal. Let everyone have a good rest. Before dawn, the army will start moving and raise our Khan flag. This time, I want Yang Qindong to die with a clear understanding. Ah. Yeshen laughed loudly as he made the final decision of his life. At this time, Yang Qindong didn't know that he had been targeted. Both the scouts and the hot air balloons in the sky had done their scouting and had come to the same conclusion. The 300,000 cavalrymen that the Ilkhanate had fought so hard for were all in a defensive position. No one took the initiative to attack and no one dared to take the initiative to attack. Therefore, the rear of the army was arranged very well. This time, in order to use the fastest and most ruthless method to deal a heavy blow to the enemy, Yang Qindong had sent out all of his 400,000 troops. The only ones left behind were some medical personnel and the 200 black cavalry soldiers. Chapter 1491. Yang Qindong even purposely separated his provisions camp because there were tens of thousands of cavalrymen in charge of guarding the provisions. Once these people were by his side, he had to worry about whether Ivan, who had designs on him, would dare to make a move. It could also be said that Yang Qindong was willing to risk his life in order to convince Ivan of his death and also to give an explanation to the blind duke and the nobles and generals of the Ross Duchy who surrendered to him. If he doesn't come, then I will only look down on his courage. Humph. After letting out a cold snort, Yang Qindong sat in the tent and slowly flipped through an ancient book. It was as if he didn't know that danger would come at any time. Ba Daojiang, who was waiting at the side, was a little nervous, but after seeing Yang Qindong's performance he calmed down a lot. He was infected by Yang Qindong's performance. Thinking of this, there were 200 black cavalry armed to the teeth with muskets. Even if Ivan came, what was there to be afraid of? He was just coming to die. Would Ivan really come? The answer was yes. The central camp was so empty. When the news reached Ivan's ears, he had a feeling that Yang Qindong had already seen through his thoughts and set up this formation to wait for him to appear. But even so, knowing that it was a trap, Ivan decided to jump into it. On this point he and Yeshen had the same idea. If he didn't make a move this time, it would be difficult to wait for such a suitable opportunity. Knowing that there was a tiger in the mountain, but still going to the tiger's mountain. At this time Ivan was determined to fight to the death. After hearing that there were only 200 black cavalry and nearly 1,000 medics in the camp, there were no other soldiers. He who was advancing according to Commander Chiwen's orders suddenly stopped. Along with him were the 500 former palace guards. It was time to make things clear to these people. When Ivan said that he was going to return to the middle corps camp and take Yang Qindong's head, Zhang Ruochen was shocked. The faces of some of the 500 palace guards who were unaware of what had happened changed drastically. It was true that they used to be guards of the palace and had received the favor of the Grand Duke of Blindness. Logically speaking, his former master was the monarch. If the monarch wanted the subject to die, the subject had no choice but to die. However, ever since they surrendered to the 5-star army, the treatment they received was no worse than the former palace guards. Most importantly, they saw too many of their clansmen who had been promoted because of their military exploits. Originally, when the 5-star army said that everyone was equal when it came to military merits, some people didn't believe it. However, reality slapped them in the face. Because of this, everyone's enthusiasm was aroused and they saw hope in life. Since others could get a military position and excellent treatment through military merits, why couldn't they also be indomitable men? Just when everyone was holding their breath and wanted to get more military merits through hard work and desperation in this battle, it turned out that their master's son actually wanted them to rebel. This psychological contrast could be imagined. For a time, many people's faces showed signs of struggle. For everyone to have such a performance, it was already in Ivan's plan. During this period of time, he had also carefully observed that these guards under his command were indeed attracted by the military merits of the 5-star army. Some of them were far more enthusiastic than before when they were training. This was another important reason why Ivan still decided to make a move even though he knew that Yang Qindong might have noticed his rebellion. He was worried that after a long time, these guards would be loyal to the 5-star army. If that was the case, he wouldn't be able to find help when he had the chance. Just based on this point, he had to rebel. He had to rebel now. The famous Ivan the Great in history wasn't called for nothing. When it came to bewitching people, he wasn't much worse than the earliest political commissars of the 5-star army. He acted as if he didn't see the hesitation on everyone's faces and said, "You are all people that father-in-law once trusted. You are all the most outstanding youths of the Ross clan. You are all the future hope of the Ross clan. You shouldn't stay in the 5-star army and be enslaved by the Han people. Even our descendants will be born as slaves. On the contrary, we should be the ones standing at the top. Now I am willing to invite everyone to fight for the future of the Ross clan. In the future, your names will be remembered by future generations. Your descendants will also be happy and proud to have ancestors like you. Brave warriors, please take out your sabers and wave your arms. Let's fight for the future of the Rossi clan. Ivan hereby promise that no matter who you are, those who die in battle will be remembered forever. Those who survive will also enjoy endless glory and wealth. Now let me ask you, are you willing to fight with this young master?" When he said this, Ivan intentionally glanced at Karela and a few other confidants in the crowd. Karela and the others, who had been waiting in the crowd for a long time, immediately waved their arms and shouted loudly, "Yes, yes." This shout, perhaps due to the crowd mentality, or perhaps because Ivan's eloquence was too good, painted a grand blueprint for everyone. In short, more and more people shouted that they were willing. In the end, all 500 warriors shouted in unison, as if anyone who fell behind was a coward. The morale was raised and everyone's enthusiasm was aroused. Finally, a satisfied look flashed across Ivan's face. Good. Now everyone follow this young master. Let's kill Yang Qindong and rebuild the Ross nation. Kill Yang Qindong and rebuild the Ross nation. Under the lead of Karela and the others, the shouts became louder and louder. Amidst the shouts, the 500 cavalrymen followed Ivan, who had already rushed out, and charged towards the central camp. Ivan's troops, who were less than 10 miles away from the central camp, separated from the main force when the sky turned dark. Because the order to retreat did not reach the ears of the 1,500 soldiers, they continued to advance according to the set goal, so the nearby allies did not notice this change. By the time they realized that something was wrong, the battle had already ended. As for the 200 black cavalry soldiers who stayed in the central camp, although the sky was already dark, none of them felt sleepy. This was because they knew that the real danger was about to come. Other than Yang Qindong, Ba Daojiang had the highest military rank among those who stayed behind. Before the sky turned dark, he had already called for the director of the field hospital that accompanied them to hide in the tent with the medical staff. No matter what happened outside, they were not allowed to come out. This was an order. The director was also confused. This was not the first time he had encountered a field hospital and a central military tent in the military camp. After all, they were non-combat troops and could play a very good role in treating the wounded. They did not need to go to the battlefield and would still be protected. But this time, it was the first time he encountered a situation where only 200 black cavalry soldiers were left in the central camp. Yang Qindong was Yang Xie's leader, the leader of the 5-star army. Leaving only 200 people to protect him was really puzzling. Could it be that there was a deeper meaning behind this? Although he was puzzled, the director did not dare to ask. He knew the rules of the army. If you should know, someone would naturally tell you. If you should not know, even if you asked around, you would not get any results. If you were not careful, someone might talk to you. If that was the case, you would be in trouble. Following Ba Daojiang's orders, the director arranged for the medical staff to stay in a few dozen tents. After giving them some short knives and other defensive weapons, he told them not to come out without orders. Even if they needed to go to the toilet, they could only do it in the tents. When the order was given, although many people were confused, no one dared to disobey a military order. As soon as these people hid themselves, a slight tremor came from the ground. A black night dragon guard who was in charge of night duty immediately ran to Ba Daojiang and saluted, reporting to the vice captain. Judging from the sound, it should be from the northeast. Got it? Continue to investigate, Ba Daojiang said with a serious face. At the same time, he muttered in his heart, it better not be that Ivan who came to seek death. Otherwise I will not be polite. About 3 minutes later, another soldier from the 5-star army came to report that there were about 500 cavalry soldiers. They were flying the flag of the 3rd Regiment of the Ming Army's 3rd Division. They were now less than 4 miles away from them. 3rd Regiment of the Ming Army's 3rd Division. After Ba Daojiang finished, he suddenly raised his head and said, do not let them come close to the camp. If they don't listen to the guards can do whatever they want. Ba Daojiang had a good memory. Because of the 6th young master's attention to Ivan, he knew that Ivan was serving in the 3rd Regiment of the Ming Army's 3rd Division. He did not believe that this was a coincidence. After the order was given, the original 10 guards quickly increased to 20 people. 10 of them were holding the 95-style swords, while the other 10 were riding on horses. This was to ensure that no matter if someone came close or tried to escape, they would be able to counterattack. The 20 black cavalry soldiers worked well together. Although there were only 20 of them, they gave off a feeling of an iron wall. This was Yang Xie's most elite combat team. Following Ba Daojiang's order, the soldiers shouted in the night to stop moving forward. However, it did not seem to be of any use. The horses were still approaching them. At this time, the number of black cavalry soldiers guarding the camp had increased to 100. Ba Daojiang could tell that there were about 500 horses. He was afraid that if there were too few soldiers guarding the camp, the enemy would rush in and threaten the 6th young master's safety. Chapter 1492. Ba Daojiang saw it as a huge test for him to be able to stay behind and bear such an important responsibility. He knew that no one in Yangxia could defeat Yang Qindong in terms of individual strength. However, he still hoped to protect the 6th young master and not give him a chance to make a move. This was what a qualified Long Wei should do. Ba Daojiang was already paying attention to the enemy, but he still neglected one thing: Ivan's cunning. Just like how Yang Qindong was creating opportunities for the enemy to make a move, Ivan also felt that although the opportunity seemed good, it was also very dangerous. Therefore he couldn't attack according to conventional methods. He had chosen to use the art of war to create a diversion. There were only 100 cavalrymen on the 500 war horses. They were responsible for feinting a frontal attack to attract the attention of the black cavalry. As for himself, he led the remaining 405 palace guards in 3 different directions and sneaked into the main camp on foot. Even though there were 400 of them, Ivan didn't intend to let them attack together. His goal was simple: to kill Yang Qindong. In order to achieve this goal, so what if he had to sacrifice the 500 people around him? In the eyes of those who wanted to achieve great things, they didn't care about trifles. In order to achieve their goals, they often used unscrupulous means. The lives of some lowly guards were nothing. Ivan's ruthlessness was beyond Ba Daojiang's expectations. Perhaps it was because of the different education methods they received. The former was willing to sacrifice everything to achieve their goals and viewed life as nothing. The latter valued the lives of his comrades more than the heavens. This difference in ideology was destined to make the latter suffer. Ivan approached the central camp on foot. He didn't see the black cavalry in the dark, but he believed that it wasn't that they didn't exist. It was just that the enemy hid well and he couldn't see them. He had a feeling that there were many pairs of eyes in the dark searching for him. When he thought about the 100 cavalrymen he sent to lure the enemy in, he knew that he didn't have much time left. Send the signal to the first squad. Tell them to attack. Ivan's eyes flashed with a vicious glint in the dark. Karela, who was beside him, agreed and lit the torch beside him. He raised it up and circled it around him. That was the signal to attack. 100 palace guards responded and rushed out from the east side of the central camp, charging out with lightning speed. There are enemies in the east. Stop them. Ba Daojiang heard the commotion from the east and immediately gave the order. A group of 30 black cavalry soldiers charged forward. However, 3 minutes later, another wave of battle cries came from the north. Ba Daojiang's eyes widened in shock. He wasn't sure how many people there were on the other side, but he was sure that it was impossible for the central tent to not be affected. 30 men go to the north. Ba Daojiang once again gave the order to split up his forces. Then he stared at his surroundings. He had a feeling that the enemies from the south would appear next. Sure enough, about 3 minutes later, battle cries could be heard from the south, and it seemed to be louder than the sounds from the north and east. Ba Daojiang couldn't stay calm anymore. He decided to report this to Yang Qindong. As soon as Hakidu Jiang turned around, Yang Qindong, who was wearing a golden cape, walked out of the tent and stood behind him. Go. Leave 10 people behind for me. For some reason, after hearing Yang Qindong's calm voice, Ba Daojiang, who was still a little flustered, instantly calmed down. Yes. Ba Daojiang saluted and left a squad of black cavalry soldiers behind. He led 40 men and charged towards the south, where the battle cries were the loudest. Beside the bonfire in front of the main tent, Yang Qindong in his golden cloak was particularly eye-catching. Perhaps this was his way of telling the enemy in the dark that he was here. If they wanted to take his life, they could come now. Otherwise they wouldn't have the chance. Just as Yang Qindong looked into the darkness, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. Then, there were more than a dozen, until there were more than 100 of them. The leader of this group was young Master Ivan of the Ross Duchy. You're finally here. Yang Qindong's voice was unhurried as he looked at the face that was revealed under the light of the bonfire. That's right, I'm here. What do you think? You didn't seem to think that you would lose the bait and lose the fish when you baited the fish. Yi Fan strode forward until he was 20 meters away from Yang Qindong before he stopped. He then asked aloud in a victorious manner. Haha, the outcome hasn't been decided yet. It's too early to say anything. I'm just curious. Don't you know how much effort your father-in-law put in to save your life? What you're doing now is equivalent to playing with fire. You're putting yourself in danger. This time no one can save you. Yang Qindong looked at Ivan and said calmly. His face was full of curiosity. Playing with fire? Ivan chuckled, then squatted down beside the bonfire. He stretched out his hands and slowly moved them around the bonfire as if he was trying to warm himself. If you don't play with fire now, sooner or later, our Ross nation will be cooked by your slow fire. Am I right? Yang Qindong wasn't surprised that Ivan could see this. After all, he was Emperor Ivan the Great. His EQ and IQ were so high that ordinary people couldn't compare to him. Being able to think of this was also within Yang Qindong's expectations. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to set up such a trap to lure the other party. It could be said that from the beginning, Yang Qindong didn't have any intention of underestimating Ivan. That was why they had this conversation, this seemingly life-or-death crisis. If Yang Qindong had ignored the other party, he was afraid that his head would have been cut off by the other party without him even knowing it. Ah, smart. Talking to smart people really saves a lot of trouble. If that's the case, then you should know that I can't only have 200 black cavalry guarding me, right? Yang Qindong asked with a mocking tone. Ivan, who was still in a victorious posture, couldn't help but tremble after hearing this sentence. Then, his eyes involuntarily scanned the surroundings. When he saw that there were no changes, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. When he looked at Yang Qindong, his eyes had a hint of viciousness. What? Do you still want to play tricks at a time like this? Or are you afraid and want to wait for the other black cavalry to come to your aid? Let me tell you, Ivan, won't give you such a chance. Come, charge and kill Yang Qindong. Whoever can do it, this young master will share the world with him. With great rewards there will be brave men. Not to mention, those who were still by Ivan's side were the staunchest Rossi nationalists. They were the kind of people who would rather give up their lives to see the rise of their nation. Therefore this shout was equivalent to an order. 100 guards shouted and charged with their swords raised. Protect the sixth young master. The remaining 10 Black Knight Dragon Guards quickly tore off the black cloth behind their backs, revealing 10 shiny 95 style guns that had been polished with gun oil. No need, these people are all brave warriors, let them die under my sword. Yang Qindong said with a smile, as if he didn't take the enemies in front of him seriously. This scene happened to be seen by Ivan. For some reason he had a bad feeling in his heart. Although he did check the movements of the various armies and observed the surroundings before making a move, he was sure that there were no reinforcements from the 5-star army nearby. But there was always a possibility. This King Wunan of Damyong was someone who had conquered many places. Who knew if he had also conquered some powerful factions and teams when he conquered other nations? Just as Ivan's face was filled with suspicion, a series of screams suddenly sounded in his ears. As far as the eye could see, the palace guards suddenly fell to the ground one after another. Then dozens of black figures appeared where they had been standing. They were all dressed in black, and even their faces were covered by black cloth, making it impossible to see their faces. These people had a common characteristic, and that was that compared to the tall and strong White Russians, they were usually shorter. Yes, these people were ninjas. Led by the special ninja under the Kurosawa, they were a surprise force arranged by Yang Qindong near the central army tent. The only thing that gave Ivan a headache was when he didn't give himself away. Once he decided to make a move, there was nothing to be afraid of. Because with the 500 palace guards in his hands, it was impossible for him to threaten Yang Qindong. If it wasn't for the fact that he needed evidence, he could have just sent a cavalry team to eliminate him. With the appearance of the ninjas, Yang Qindong became a spectator. Unknowingly, there was a large chair under his butt. He was sitting on it next to a bonfire. It was April, so the night was still very cold. Who are you people? Why are you helping the evildoer? If you retreat now, this Gongzi can pretend that nothing happened. Even though he knew it was useless, Ivan still shouted it out. This was his only hope now. Unfortunately, his shout didn't attract any response. It wasn't that the Kurosawa disdained to talk to him, but Ivan shouted in Russian. The other party couldn't understand, so how could they respond? Yang Qindong, who understood, laughed and replied for the Kurosawa. They are ninjas from the Japanese province. They like to use the environment to kill people without leaving a trace. If we were to fight on horseback, these ninjas might not be your match. But in the darkness, on land, they are the true kings. Even this king's black cavalry can't compare. Chapter 1493. Ninjas from the Japanese province? They're actually not Han people. You actually dared to arrange such a strong force to protect you. Aren't you afraid that they'll betray you and do something that's not beneficial to you? Ivan asked in shock. At the very least, if it was him, he definitely wouldn't trust the strength of a foreign race so easily. Betray me? Why would they do that? Although the current Japanese people aren't the same as before, they've all moved away. But no matter where they go, as long as they're in my Yangxia territory, they can live a better and more stable life. They should be happy and satisfied right now, right? How could they think of harming this king? Ivan, not everyone is like you, an ungrateful wretch. Yang Qindong took this opportunity to mock Ivan. Bah, they're all fools. They were tricked by you, deceived by you. I'm sure they'll regret it in the future. Ivan shouted with a look of disagreement. Then, with tears in their eyes, they watched as the guards beside them were killed one by one. Many of them had only raised their swords to slash at the air before they were stabbed in the body or vital parts of their bodies from an unknown direction and died in battle. They won't regret it. As long as they can live a good life, who would rebel? Giving up a good life and risking their lives for an unknown future, who would be so stupid? Of course, it's undeniable that there are still some determined people who will do all kinds of things, but unfortunately you won't be able to see it, right? Oh, you have to remember the people who killed you weren't this king but these Japanese ninjas. At the end of Yang Qindong's words, he seemed to have thought of something happy and laughed out loud. When Ivan heard all of this, his face was full of anger and unwillingness. Yang Qindong, you're too ruthless, too ruthless. Ivan's ruthlessness wasn't because Yang Qindong killed 500 of his people without blinking, but because the people who killed him were Japanese ninjas. And after Yang Qindong spread the news, if there were still Russian loyalists, the next target of their revenge would not be Yang Qindong, but these ninjas. This was simply a diversion of disaster. This move could be said to solve many problems once and for all. In this way Yang Qindong would be completely out of the picture. Wasn't this ruthless enough? Thinking that from now on, even if his father-in-law who was under house arrest heard the news, he would only hate these ninjas even more, Ivan decided to escape. With the appearance of these kings of the darkness, it was impossible for him to kill Yang Qindong. Since that's the case, it's better to escape, at least he can't let Yang Qindong's treacherous plan succeed. Thinking like this, he said to Corella, who was still standing in front of him to protect him, "I'll leave this place to you, this Gongzi will take good care of your family in the future." Corella was stunned for a moment, but he quickly nodded. "Don't worry, Gongzi. Leave this place to me." "Good." Ivan was touched to have such a loyal subordinate, but just as he nodded, before he could turn around to escape, Corella already fell to the ground with a plop. At this moment, blood was trickling out from his eyebrows. Just like that, Corella died without even being able to defend. The one who killed him was the special shinobi Kuishi. His figure was floating towards Ivan's position at this moment. The dark environment seems to be prepared for ninjas, this is their natural hunting ground. As Yang Qindong said, in this environment, ninjas can exert their full strength. In this environment, even if the black cavalry encountered them, it would be difficult for them to defeat them. Of course, it's also very difficult for ninjas to break through the black cavalry's most elite armor. Perhaps the final result would be a tie. In terms of defense, the black cavalry's tyrannical equipment is naturally unbreakable. In terms of offense, the ninja's illusory figure and tricky technique can be said to be invincible. After killing Corella, Blast Ishii set his next target on Ivan. Ivan's IQ was very high and his heart was also very big. Especially in the later years of his life, he was even more meticulous, which led to his title of Ivan the Great. But in terms of power, he was only a little stronger than ordinary people, but still inferior to the fierce generals in the army. Now that he's so young, how could he be the opponent of Kuishi? When the sword suddenly attacked in the dark night, he only saw a black shadow move. After he said the words so fast in his heart, his whole body trembled and he fell backwards. Ninjas have always been the main way to kill people, and after a successful attack they will leave. Unless it's a last resort, they won't entangle with the target and the opponent. Special ninja Kazushige Ishikawa used it to the extreme. Under the cover of darkness, he slashed Ivan's neck with just one blow. When the main artery continued to spurt out blood, he had already left and went to the next target. Ivan died like this, quietly looking up at the starry night sky with a posture of looking up. His face was not ferocious but also not peaceful. If you look carefully, there is a trace of confusion and unwillingness. Ivan's death proved a fact. That is, there will be no more Ivan the Great in history. His life was completely changed because of meeting Yang Qindong, and it was ended in advance. Just less than 2 minutes after Ivan's death, no white Russian soldiers could be seen outside the main tent. All of them died in the hands of a team of 50 ninjas. Their death only resulted in minor injuries to 3 ninjas. From the beginning to the end, 10 black cavalry stood around Yang Qindong to protect him, and they didn't even move a finger, and the matter was over. "Very good, Kuishi, your task was done very well and you will be rewarded," Yang Qindong said with a smile on his face. "Thank you for the king's praise, this is what we should do," Kuishi said without the slightest emotion. Since they surrendered to Yang Qindong, these ninjas didn't have to worry about their livelihood and food. They could focus on training, and they became the primitive ninjas who didn't care about the world and only cared about martial arts. All of this is because of Yang Qindong. Now they just killed some people for him, it's not a big deal. Good. Kuishi's attitude made Yang Qindong very satisfied. Then the space fell into silence. Yang Qindong didn't mean to let them leave, he wanted to do some things more seriously. Even so, it's not time for these ninjas to leave. At this time, the sound of gunshots could be heard in the night, and sometimes there was the sound of U-5 style. From this, it can be seen that the battle on the other battlefields is very fierce. About 10 minutes later, the first team returned, and soon the second team appeared, until the third team led by Hashirama returned. Hashirama was the one who was most worried about the safety of this place, but his opponents were twice as many as the others. He led 40 black cavalry to fight for a while, but even so he was still a little late compared to the others. When he returned to the main tent, he saw the corpses lying on the ground. He couldn't help but ask anxiously, "Is the sixth young master okay?" "It's okay, thanks to the appearance of the ninjas. They killed Ivan and the rebels he brought with him." "Well, how's your situation? Are there any casualties?" Yang Qindong deliberately mentioned the ninjas in order to deepen everyone's impression. Reporting to the sixth young master, 7 of our black cavalry were injured, no one died. At the same time, we also captured a total of 73 rebels. Hearing that Yang Qindong was fine, Hashirama could finally breathe a sigh of relief, so he said in a deep voice, "Good. Interrogate them well before it is announced these people can't die." Hearing that so many people were captured, Yang Qindong's face showed a satisfied look. There were some things that couldn't be said by himself. If he said that Ivan rebelled, then so be it. There had to be evidence. Now these 73 people were the witnesses. As long as this battle was won, he could push out these 73 people in front of everyone, and the news of Ivan's rebellion would spread everywhere. At that time, no one would be able to use this matter to blame him. After the order, the medical staff who had been hiding in the big tent also came out of the tent and began to check the wounds of the 7 black cavalry, and bandage the wounds of the 73 captives. These people are very important, and before the facts are clarified, there can't be any problems. Ivan is finally dead, the crisis has been resolved. Yang Qindong returned to the big tent to rest. As for the other black cavalry, only half of them were left to guard with the ninjas, and the rest went to rest. In everyone's view, they just need to wait for the results of the victory on the front line. But they didn't know that a bigger crisis is coming step by step. Because Ivan's rebellion was too close to the main army camp, the Wara Wara scouts who were responsible for intelligence didn't see it too clearly. But the gunshots and shouts were still heard by them, and it was passed back to the leader Yeshin's ears. Such a thing happened, which was somewhat beyond Yeshin's expectation. He couldn't figure out what had happened, but one thing was for sure. Last night, there must have been a massacre in the 5-star Army's camp. Maybe someone rebelled, or the army of Ilkhanate killed their way to the main army camp. But in any case, this has nothing to do with Yeshen. Unless he can be sure that Yang Qindong is dead, he will never stop. Well, the order is passed down. Everyone take the time to rest. We will set off tomorrow at dawn. This time we won't stop until we achieve our goal. Chapter 1494. Time slowly passed and the sky gradually brightened. A new day arrived as expected. 20 miles away from the central camp, Yeshen led 30,000 elite cavalry to the camp. For the elite cavalry, it didn't take long to cover the distance of 20 miles. But before they even arrived, the rumbling sound of horses galloping could be heard. What's going on? Where did the cavalry come from? Ba Dao Jiang didn't sleep for the entire night, but he was still very alert. When he heard the strange movement, he immediately shouted towards the wooden building in front of the central camp. Cavalry? So many cavalrymen. The Black Knight Dragon Guard sentry on the wooden building let out a heart-pounding roar. Yang Qindong also heard the commotion and walked out of the central camp. Not only that, but the nearby medical personnel also walked out of the tent. Some of them were still rubbing their eyes sleepily, obviously not aware that they were in danger. There are about 30,000 cavalry, and they are flying the flag of the world of Wara, the flag of the world of Wara. The black cavalry sentry on the wooden building shouted with a trembling voice. After confirming the direction of the cavalry, Yang Qindong knew that something was wrong. Because that was his rear, there shouldn't be any large number of cavalrymen appearing. When he heard that there were 30,000 enemy cavalry, Yang Qindong's face sank. When he heard that the enemy was flying the flag of the world of Wara, his first thought was that it was Yeshen, his old enemy. The world of Wara. Not good, sixth young master, please get on your horse and leave immediately. Ba Dao Jiang's face finally showed fear. This was different from other enemies. This was the world of Wara, and there were more than 30,000 of them. Their current defensive force, including the ninjas, was only about 200 people. As for the medical personnel, their combat power was negligible. Therefore it was impossible for them to win, and the only way was to escape. Sixth young master, please get on your horse and leave. We are willing to bring up the rear and hold off the enemy with our lives. The other black cavalry dragon guards also reacted and knelt on the ground. Even the medical personnel were kneeling on the ground, begging for help. At this time Yang Qindong's eyes were deep. Yi Zichen's sudden appearance was indeed beyond his expectations. Originally he thought that the other party had escaped and that they would never meet again in this life. Even if they were to be found, it should be one of the other 5-star armies. But who would have thought that the heavens would be so kind to him? He had just gotten rid of a thorn in his side, Yi Fan, and now an old rival was sent to him. In Yang Qindong's heart, Yes Hen was also very important. Although he wasn't as important as Ivan, if he could get rid of him, Yes Hen was a good thing. Why couldn't he find them before? Now that it had delivered itself to his doorstep, there was no way he would miss such an opportunity. Escape? Ah. Yang Qindong's heart was calm, but his face was also very calm. He looked at Badao Jiang and the others kneeling on the ground and made a gesture of supporting them. It's only 30,000 cavalry, there's nothing to be afraid of. Soldiers, take out your weapons and protect the main tent. Don't let the enemy rush in. Sixth young master, there are 30,000 of them. Badao Jiang said with a hesitant expression. For a long time Yang Qindong had formed a feeling of omniscience and omnipotence in their hearts. But this time there were 30,000 of them, and they didn't even have a combat power of 300. The difference was too great. What? You don't have confidence in the young master? Yang Qindong looked at Badao Jiang and asked. Then he laughed and said, if that's the case, let's see how the young master will turn your army into ashes with a smile. Ah. Was Yang Qindong arrogant? Of course not. He was someone who owned a large warehouse. What kind of advanced weapons did he not have? How could he be afraid of 30,000 enemy cavalry? Everyone was originally panicking, but they were all stunned by Yang Qindong's laughter. Just when everyone was wondering why the sixth young master was still laughing, Yang Qindong had already put on the golden robe. Sixth young master, what are you doing? If anyone is going to wear it, it should be me. Badao Jiang saw Yang Qindong's actions and wanted to snatch it. No, you can't wear this. Yang Qindong waved his arm and easily let Badao Jiang snatch it. He knew that Badao Jiang had good intentions and wanted to wear the robe to lure the enemy to chase him. Badao Jiang's intentions were good, but his ability was still lacking. Yang Qindong unfolded his robe and casually draped it over his body. He used his fingers to slowly tie a knot in front of his body. Then Yang Qindong let out a long whistle and the white dragon flew in front of him. Amidst the laughter, Yang Qindong leaped onto the horse. Wait for me to lure them away. You must protect your home well. Ah, you don't have to worry. I have already predicted this. I have already arranged 100,000 cavalrymen in the forest ahead. Dealing with them will be a piece of cake. As he spoke, he gave Badao Jiang a look that said, I'll leave this to you. Then he exerted strength in his legs and urged his horse to charge towards the enemy. Seeing Yang Qindong get on his horse and leave, Badao Jiang wanted to follow closely behind. However, when he saw more than 1,000 medical personnel around him and recalled the sixth young master's instructions, he stomped his feet and gritted his teeth. Everyone listen to my orders. The women will hide in the tent. The men will collect their weapons. We must protect our home. When the sixth young master returns, we must all stand in front of the sixth young master. Badao Jiang's position here was the highest. Since he had already given his orders, even if the others were willing, they had to obey. Immediately, 200 black cavalry soldiers, 50 ninjas, and close to 200 male medical personnel came forward to collect their weapons. Yang Qindong galloped forward on his horse. His eyes were cold and murderous as he charged towards the enemy. Gale Leaf's golden robe fluttered in the wind. Even though the distance between the two parties was far, it was already very eye-catching. What is that? Seeing a warhorse approaching from afar, Yes Hen, who was charging at the front, couldn't help but slow down his horse out of instinct. This time, in order to achieve the goal of success in one strike, he had also put his life on the line. He had taken the lead and rushed to the front. It could be said that he had taken the lead. It was precisely because Yes Hen was charging at the front that he could see the enemy very clearly. When the distance between the two parties was less than 150 steps, Yes Hen finally saw the enemy clearly. Although he wasn't very clear due to the distance, he could vaguely see the shape of Yang Qindong. Aha, are you Yes Hen? Do you dare to fight one-on-one with this king? Yang Qindong also stopped his horse when he was 150 steps away. Not only was he not afraid of the enemy, he even issued a challenge loudly. It's Bugnam of Gojoseon. Hearing the voice that he had heard countless times in his dreams, Yes Hen instantly became excited. He didn't know that the five-star army's main camp was extremely empty in order to lure Ivan into a trap. At this moment he didn't think so much. He only knew that the person in front of him was undoubtedly Yang Qindong. He couldn't be more familiar with that voice. As for that figure, even if it turned into ashes he would still recognize it. It was precisely because of this that when he saw Yang Qindong personally coming out to greet him and even wanted to fight him one-on-one, he instinctively thought that the other party had some goal or even a trap. For a moment, he didn't dare to say anything and just stood there in a daze. "Aha, cowardly child. Aha, giddy up." Seeing Yes Hen lead the army to stop, he felt proud when he thought about how he had defeated 30,000 soldiers and even suppressed the other party in terms of momentum. After a burst of laughter, he whipped his horse and galloped towards the not-so-big tree on the left. Just as he was wondering what Yang Qindong was up to and what he was going to do, he suddenly saw Yang Qindong walk in a different direction. After 2 breaths of time he cried out that he had been tricked. At this moment, how could he not see that Yang Qindong was obviously afraid of him and wanted to escape? Haha, who would have thought that the great King Wunan of Damyang, the war god Yang Qindong, who had the title of war god, would actually have a time when he didn't have any soldiers by his side. This is the heavens taking care of me. Since that's the case, boys, follow me and chase him down. Today we will definitely kill Bugnam of Gojoseon on his horse and take revenge for our brothers who died. Yes Hen waved his saber and rode his horse. With a loud roar, he followed closely behind Yang Qindong like a gust of wind. After the other Mongol cavalry heard their leaders shout, they were all extremely excited. They followed behind Yang Qindong, shouting and yelling. At this moment, no one would have thought that such a thing would happen. No one would have thought that this mission would be so easy to complete. No one would have thought that the result of this charge would be so many people dying without a complete corpse. The battle at the front was in full swing. At this moment, the generals of the five-star army did not think that behind them, their master Yang Qindong was being chased by 30,000 Mongol cavalry. After a day and night of rushing, the Russian 2nd Division became the first five-star army to fight with the Ilkhanate army on the battlefield. Almost in a straight line, Agurav led his 50,000 soldiers to meet the Ilkhanate's 20,000 Mongol cavalry. Perhaps the enemy did not think that the five-star army would advance so quickly. They were completely unprepared. They did not even have time to spread out their army, and the army behind them was still moving forward. Seeing this opportunity, how could Nikolaev let it go? He immediately shouted to encourage his soldiers, "Generals, the chance to kill the enemy has come. They don't have as many people as we do. Charge! Charge!" A total of 50,000 Mongol cavalry rushed out under the command of their general. In terms of individual size, the White Russian man was much taller than the Mongol. Adding on the fact that they had the advantage in numbers, their charge was full of momentum. Therefore, when they attacked, the 20,000 Mongol cavalry quickly ran away. Chapter 1495. These 20,000 Khaganate soldiers had been sent by Yusang. Originally, Harsan Khan had given them the task of forming a defensive line in the center to stop the charge of the five-star army. If possible, it would be best to delay them and give the main force a chance to surround them. However, an army was still an army. It was impossible for them to be truly united. Seeing the cavalry of the five-star army charge over, and the enemy outnumbered them, they were thrown into disarray. In addition, their defensive line had yet to be fully formed. Before they could even meet the enemy, they had already fallen into disarray. Quick, send someone to inform Harsan Khan. Ask for reinforcements, ask for reinforcements. As the Yusang general fled, he sent out scouts on horseback to report the news. Compared to their primitive method of sending messages, the five-star army's method of sending messages was far more advanced. Moreover, just the hot air balloons that floated in the sky from time to time had already clearly seen what was happening below. Our 2 divisions are currently pursuing Yusang. There's no danger nearby. I repeat, there's no danger. On the hot air balloon, an Air Force soldier was using binoculars to observe the movements on the ground. At the same time, he was using flag signals to report to the surrounding hot air balloons. Just like that, while someone was watching from the sky, the 2 divisions on the ground boldly gave chase. This chase lasted for a full 50 li. Soon after, a signal came from the sky. On their left flank, 30,000 cavalry carrying the banner of the Crimean Khanate were circling around. What was even worse was that on their right flank, a group of 50,000 cavalry under the banner of the Khanate was also approaching from all sides. 30,000 plus 50,000 plus 20,000, that's a total of 100,000 people. On the ground, after seeing the news from the hot air balloons in the sky, Nikolaev did some calculations and realized that his forces were inferior. Thus, he decided to stop the chase and retreat from the battlefield. However, before he could do anything, the hot air balloons in the sky sent another message. Behind them, the 40,000 soldiers of the Mongolian 2nd Division Air He were approaching. Based on their speed, they should be able to reach the battlefield in less than an hour. 5 plus 4, that's 90,000 people. 90,000 against 100,000, this battle is still possible. After Nikolaev received the news, he quickly changed his mind. He immediately gave the order for the entire army to stop their pursuit and scatter iron caltrops on the ground to form a defensive formation. They were waiting for reinforcements to arrive so that they could attack from both sides. Before they set off, Yang Qindong had told them in front of the officers at the division level and above that the most important goal of this battle was to eliminate the enemy's power. Therefore, as long as the conditions were right, it was best to engage in a decisive battle with the enemy's main force when their own safety wasn't too threatened. This would save them the time to search for the enemy, which was beneficial to the 5-star army who had limited logistical resources. It was precisely because he remembered this sentence that Nicholas was thinking about whether he could have a decisive battle with the other party. Since he was the one who started the first great battle, he must have contributed a lot. After the division commander gave the order, the soldiers stopped their pursuit and began to get busy. Just as they began to wait for the enemy cavalry to appear and prepare for a big battle, the news of this place was spread by the Air Force. 60 li to the west of them was the world's 1st Cavalry Division's 4th Division commander, Tsukuda. This person, who was once the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division because he made a mistake, he was swapped with by Shuang, who was originally the commander. To tell the truth, he was in a very bad mood at that time, even though the 1st Cavalry Division was famous for its fighting prowess. But after being demoted from commander to commander, he still felt stifled in his heart. As the time he spent in the No. 1 Division grew longer and longer, he experienced the process of the No. 1 Division becoming the No. 1 Army. When he was promoted from the 4th Regiment commander to the 4th Division commander, he liked this army even more. He discovered that the world's 1st Cavalry Division was a wolf king in the wilderness. Compared to other armies, divisions, they had more war resources, which meant that they had more opportunities to fight on the battlefield. A general could only show his ability on the battlefield. Needless to say, the warlike Tsukuda had long fallen in love with this place. At the same time, he also learned a lot from Commander Tianhu and the other division commanders. Under his efforts, the strength of the 4th Cavalry Division continued to rise. Although his division was also a reinforced division with 5 regiments, it still had 10,000 soldiers. But in terms of real fighting strength, even if they met 20,000 or 30,000 enemies on the battlefield, they still dared to fight and had a high chance of winning. Tsukuda regarded every battle as a learning experience. He hoped that he could grow better so that he could bear a bigger burden in the future. But unfortunately, before coming to the battlefield, he wondered if he would be lucky enough to meet the first enemy. If it was as he wished, even if the enemy had 50,000 people, he would still dare to charge. He also believed that as long as he fought resolutely, tenaciously, and showed the might of the 4th Cavalry Division, it was not impossible for them to win. Unfortunately, his luck was not too good. The first battle was snatched by Nicholas of the Russian 2nd Cavalry Division. When he heard the news from the space that 50,000 people were chasing 20,000 people, although the other side's battlefield was not too far away, he still didn't want to interfere. Tsukuda didn't want to snatch other people's credit. Not to mention his own 60,000 people bullying the enemy's 20,000 people. But the situation of a battle always changed in an instant. Soon another news came from the space. The Russian 2nd Cavalry Division was surrounded, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they joined forces with the nearby Ming 2nd Cavalry Division and prepared for a tough battle. 90,000 against 100,000, this is not fair? Well, if I add my own 10,000 people, then it would be fair. Tsukuda laughed after hearing the news. He knew that his chance to show his skills had come. Immediately, he ordered the army to change direction and rush toward the Russian 2nd Cavalry Division's location. At this time, at the Russian 2nd Cavalry Division's location, Nicholas didn't know that the battle here had attracted the attention of many people. Even the arrogant world's 1st Cavalry Division's 4th Cavalry Division was attracted by the battle here and was rushing over. At this time, he only knew that his 50,000 men were surrounded by the enemy's 100,000 cavalry. To many people, 100,000 was just a number that came out of their mouths. But when you see 100,000 cavalry in front of you, the feeling was absolutely different from what was said. It was absolutely spectacular. Layer after layer of enemy cavalry appeared and surrounded them from all sides. Seeing this scene, not only did Nicholas feel his whole body go numb, many of the soldiers also had the same thought. Let's talk about Nicholas himself. He was just a guardian of a small tribe with hundreds of people. Looking at the situation at that time, even if the Mongol cavalry sent out a small group of 50 people, they would be able to force him to retreat step by step. It was also very possible that they could even wipe out his tribe. And now, although he had gained some experience in the 5-star army, he was facing 100,000 cavalry this time. At this moment, his heart began to panic. He wasn't sure if he could stop the charge of the Mongol cavalry and didn't dare to guarantee that they could last until reinforcements arrived. But now that things had reached this point, even if Nicholas wanted to escape, he probably wouldn't have the chance. Moreover, he couldn't escape. He couldn't let down Yang Qindong's expectations of him. Everyone, put up your bows and arrows and shoot the enemies in the encirclement. According to what he had learned, Nicholas forced himself to calm down and loudly roared. No matter what, they had killed their way over from Eastern Europe and many of the soldiers had seen blood. Although today's battle was quite big, it wasn't enough to shake them. After hearing the commander's order, everyone quickly calmed down and went to their positions. The charging Khanate Alliance army was getting closer and closer. Finally, when they were less than 500 steps away, they were entangled by the caltrops on the ground. Many of the war horses were injured and many of the cavalry fell off their horses, causing the momentum of the charging cavalry to stagnate. Charge! Seeing that this was a rare opportunity, Nicholas swallowed his saliva and loudly roared. The 5,000 White Russian cavalrymen at the front charged forward. They held strong bows in their hands and shot out arrows one after another. Unfortunately, due to the lack of distance, many of the arrows didn't have the effect they should have. From this, it could be seen that in terms of cavalry usage, the White Russian army was indeed inferior to the Mongols who lived on horseback since young. After a wave of arrows, both sides were entangled. In an instant, the battlefield was filled with the sounds of killing and blood splattered everywhere. The stench of blood filled the air. The battle had begun, and both sides continued to send troops to the battlefield. This battle lasted for close to 6 hours. The Russian 2nd Division had paid the price of 8,000 men to block the attacks of the Khanate Alliance army. They had also endured until the arrival of the Mongol 2nd Division. He was originally the chief of a 30,000 tribe. Although he didn't have many people in charge, he had participated in many battles. The Mongol soldiers under him were carefully selected from the Golden Horde army. Although they couldn't be said to be 1 in 100, they were all equipped with good military qualities. With their arrival, the pressure on the Russian 2nd Division was reduced by a lot. The battle began to enter a state of stalemate. Back to the small forest, it was only a small forest that occupied 5 or 6 acres of land. Compared to the mountainous terrain of the Ilkhanate, it was nothing. Yang Qindong wore an eye-catching golden battle robe and rushed into the small forest, attracting Yeshen's main force here. Chapter 1496. Yeshen had only sent 1,000 cavalrymen to the 5-star army's main camp to scout out the enemy's strength and also to delay the 5-star army. He himself led 1,000 cavalrymen to chase after Yang Qindong. This was their ultimate goal. Before coming here, Yeshen had thought that he would encounter all kinds of problems. After all, as Yang Xie's territory grew bigger and Bugnam of Gojoseon's reputation became more prominent, things would only become more difficult if he wanted to harm Yang Qindong. Before coming here, Yeshen had even prepared for the worst, which was that he might not even be able to see Yang Qindong's true appearance even if he used up all 30,000 cavalrymen. However, Yeshen, who did not have many days left in his body, went all out. If he didn't kill Yang Qindong, he wouldn't be able to rest in peace even if he died. What he didn't expect was that things would go so smoothly. Not only did they find Yang Qindong, but they also found Yang Qindong, who was alone. Yeshen didn't really care that this person left the main camp and came to this small forest. It was just a small forest. Even if there was an ambush, how many people could there be? If that happened, his 30,000 cavalrymen would be able to drown the enemy with their spit. When they were 1,000 steps away from the small forest, Yeshen's shout was transmitted to the army. Quick, spread out the cavalry and surround this small forest. We can't let Yang Qindong escape. However, before the cavalry behind him could follow his orders, a series of rumbling sounds entered their ears. Then, under everyone's puzzled expression, a huge object suddenly rose from the sky above the small forest. A flying figure with a dark green shell suddenly appeared in front of everyone's eyes. What was this thing that no one could name? It was because they had never seen such a thing before. For a green shell to be able to fly in the air and hover dozens of meters above the ground, the appearance of this object was beyond the imagination of many people. At this moment they were at a loss for what to do. Following the appearance of the flying object, nearly 30,000 Walla cavalry stood rooted to the ground. They even forgot to charge, to advance, to disperse, and to draw their swords. Haha, Yang Qindong was sitting in the cockpit of the aircraft with a confident smile on his face. In this world he was probably the only one who knew what this flying object was, the V-10 helicopter. The W-10 helicopter was 15 meters long when the rotor blades were rotating, 84 meters tall and 35 meters wide at its widest point, including the short wings. It adopted the internationally popular tandem cockpit configuration, a narrow fuselage and a 3-point anti-collision landing gear. It can carry 1,500 kilograms of ammunition, including 57 rockets and Red Arrow series anti-tank missiles. A 23mm machine gun was fixed in front of the cockpit. There was also a 5mm Gatling gun on the side, not the blue one, hee. This was where Yang Qindong's confidence came from. Although the V-10 helicopter in the military warehouse was not the most powerful helicopter in the country, it was still an absolutely powerful weapon in this era. Even if he gave it to the research department in Resin City, they would not be able to replicate it. This kind of thing could only be found in the warehouse, and only Yang Qindong knew how to fly it. Now that he took it out, he wanted to get rid of Yes-Hen once and for all. This once troublesome opponent was now a dead man. The V-10 helicopter flew straight into the air, then continued to climb until it reached a height of about 80 meters before it stabilized. The cannon inside the helicopter was aimed at the densely packed Walla cavalry below. A dazzling red light flashed, and a rocket flew at supersonic speed into the Walla cavalry's camp. Boom! With a flash of fire, the rocket launcher exploded on the ground. The shockwave from the explosion caused many of the newly grown trees in the nearby forest to be cut in half. This powerful force also created a huge gap in the Walla cavalry's camp. Yang Qindong, who was sitting in the cockpit, had good eyesight and powerful calculation ability. With just a rough calculation, he calculated the effect of directly or indirectly killing nearly 1,000 people. This was also because the Walla cavalry's camp was too densely packed. Otherwise the effect would not be so good. After the successful attack, Yang Qindong did not hold back anymore. His right thumb kept pressing, and one rocket after another was fired at the Walla army's camp. Waves of people were thrown off their horses and corpses were everywhere. Because Yes-Hen was at the front, he was not injured by the rocket. However, he still saw everything that happened behind him. Seeing the self-proclaimed heroes, the elite warriors of the cavalry, being blasted to death one after another without even having the chance to wield their swords, and being blasted into pieces, and if they were sent flying by the aftershock they would vomit blood and die. His heart would bleed. How did Yang Qindong come up with such an invincible weapon? He still remembered that when he first met Yang Qindong, he was stunned by the enemy's rocket that could hit dozens of miles away. He had no choice but to give up on the siege of the great Ming dynasty's capital. Even though many years had passed, Yes-Hen still could not forget the scene at that time. And now, when they were gradually getting used to the powerful firearms and cannons of the five-star army, the enemy came up with something that could fly. Moreover, it had such a powerful lethality, and he was once again heavily injured. When he thought about his physical condition, he was afraid that if he failed this time, he would not have the chance to kill Yang Qindong again. He felt his heart bleeding. Men released the arrows and killed this flying object. Knowing that this was the last chance in his life, Yes-Hen gritted his teeth and gave the order to shoot the aircraft. From here, one could see the last remaining elite cavalry of the Wara. Facing the indescribable flying object and the V-10 that had the power to kill them, they did not collapse like the other cavalry troops. Instead, after hearing the order from their leader Yes-Hen, one by one, they knocked their bows and quickly aimed at the V-10 in the air. They used all their strength to release the arrows in their hands. The V-10 rose 80 steps into the air, and under the strong gravity, these arrows without exception fell back to the ground. Even the best archer, the strongest archer, could only shoot 30 to 40 steps away. It was impossible to hurt the V-10 in the slightest. Yang Qindong had long thought of this result. He did not care about the arrows shot by the Walla cavalry. Instead, he used this opportunity to continuously fire rockets and kill the enemy as much as possible. Since even the V-10 was brought out, Yang Qindong did not plan to let these people go. He did not say that he had to kill all of them, but at least 90% of them would be killed. When only 10% of them were left, even if they went out and said something, How credible would it be? How big would their influence be? Everyone would probably call them lunatics. Artillery shells were fired one after another. In less than a quarter of an hour, the outside of the small forest was covered with the corpses of horses and cavalry. With a rough glance, the number of people had probably exceeded 10,000. Finally, under the powerful lethality and the fact that he could only passively take a beating, Yeshin's eyes revealed a look of despair. This feeling of being killed but not being able to hurt anyone at all made him so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. Looking at the flying object in the sky, he could not help but look up to the sky and sigh. Why was the 5-star army always able to come up with an endless stream of unexpected weapons? Why was their heroic Warawala cavalry only able to passively take a beating without even being able to fight back? Could it be that Tingri had abandoned them? Leader, let's retreat. General Bomur came to Yeshin's side. He could feel the despair in Yeshin's heart. How could he not feel the same way? But in the face of the V-10 they were really helpless. They did not even have a flintlock. How could they compare with such a high-end helicopter? Retreat? Don't we have any other way? The enemy's artillery shouldn't be endless. Yeshen said with a look of unwillingness. Just as Yeshen said, there were not many artillery shells left in the V-10. Yang Qindong was not going to use them. It was not that he was reluctant to use them. There were many good things in the big warehouse. He did not use them because there were no large groups of enemies in his line of sight. It would be a waste to use the rocket launchers. Next, it was time for the machine gun to show its power. Yang Qindong gave up the 23mm machine gun and chose the 14.5mm Gatling gun. This machine gun had a fast firing rate and was powerful enough. At least, it was more than enough to deal with the Wala cavalry. After fixing the Gatling gun, Yang Qindong adjusted it to the best angle and used his skillful flying skills to start another massacre. Da-da-da-da. 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 The Gatling gun displayed its unique tyrannical side. Bullets flew, piercing through the air, piercing the skin of the cavalrymen. Lives were quickly drained away. One by one, the cavalrymen fell to the ground in despair. Even in death, they didn't understand what this flying object was. How many more weapons did it have? Could it win or not? Did they have the ability to fight back when it arrived? Their actions, or rather, their actions of throwing their lives away, were nothing. The sound of gunfire continued, and at the rate of thousands of shots per minute, the Wala cavalrymen who were still standing in place, seemingly waiting for their verdict, were shot down one by one. It was as easy as a human pulling out weeds. Under the intense gunshots, more and more Wala cavalry were killed. This tragic scene, or rather, this helpless scene, finally crushed the hearts of the cavalrymen. When they realized that there was nothing they could do but die here, they began to flee. Chapter 1497. With the first to escape, there would be a second. They were already under great psychological pressure and were about to collapse. Now that there was such a fuse, everyone followed suit. In this way, these people quickly formed a torrent. In a short period of time, the number of cavalry that escaped had reached thousands. In the cockpit of the V-10 helicopter, Yang Qindong looked at the Mongolian cavalry that had gathered together again. He placed the Gatling gun to the side and then pressed the button to launch the rocket. There was a hint of madness on his face as he said, "You think you can come and go as you please? Where do you think this is, huh?" As soon as the word, "ah," left his mouth, a rocket whizzed out and landed right in the middle of the fleeing cavalry camp. At that moment, the rocket hit at least dozens of people, shattering their bones and killing them on the ground. The powerful aftershock set off a huge wave that overturned the Mongolian cavalry that were more than 10 meters away. Their horses were sent flying and the cavalry fell to the ground. It was a tragic death. After the rocket, Yang Qindong once again controlled the Gatling gun. He liked the feeling of chasing after the enemy and firing continuously. At this time he couldn't help but think of Beta Persei. If this person was here, he would probably be shouting excitedly while firing. The gunshots continued, and under the continuous gunshots, more and more Wala cavalry were killed on their horses or thrown away because their horses were shot. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. In less than an hour, more than half of the nearly 30,000 Wala cavalry had been killed or injured. On the battlefield, other than 1,000 people who were lucky enough to escape, there were less than 5,000 cavalry led by Yeshen. "Bomur, I order you to take the people and leave here. In the future, if the Wara people want to survive, they will need a certain amount of armed forces. In the future I can't protect them anymore. It's up to you." At this moment, Yeshen began to entrust the children to him. The cruelty of reality and the appearance of the V-10 helicopter made Yeshen's heart completely despair. He finally realized that all along Bugnam of Gojosian had never taken him seriously. Otherwise, if he had taken out such a flying object earlier, he would not have been able to do anything. And now, even though he knew he did not plan to leave, since he couldn't take revenge, even if he died, he would die in the hands of his enemy. This could be considered a kind of heroism, a kind of fulfillment of his wish. Chief, Bomure was stunned when he heard Yeshen's words, and then tears came out of his eyes. All right, a real man bleeds, not tears. Don't cry anymore. Take these cavalrymen and leave. Remember, don't think about revenge in the future. This Bugnam of Gojosian is a devil, a man blessed by the heavens. We are no match for him. Yeshen acted as if he was an experienced person and wanted to continue giving orders. However, the sudden attack of a rocket launcher made him go completely crazy. On the ground, the Walla cavalry had already scattered. Yang Qindong's goal should have been achieved, because those who wanted to kill him had either escaped or been killed. But with his flying glasses, he still found Yeshen's location. Seeing that the Wallace chief was still alive, he couldn't help but sigh at his luck. Since that's the case, he will give him another rocket launcher. He doesn't believe that people can be made of iron. Even if they are made of iron, he will refine them into water. As such, just as he was about to instruct Bomure about the matters behind him, a rocket suddenly exploded a dozen meters away from him. The powerful shockwave directly sent Bomure, who was facing the shockwave of the rocket, flying away. Yeshen was lucky. His back was facing the direction of the rocket launcher, so he didn't die immediately. Instead, he was injured by the aftermath and fell to the ground. But even so, he was seriously injured. A large piece of shrapnel was embedded in his back. Under the medical conditions at that time, it was very difficult to save him. After lying on the ground for a long time, Yeshen slowly raised his head and saw the scene of Bomure bleeding from the corner of his mouth and dying not far away. Bomure was his hope, and the protector of the Wara tribe in the future. Without him and Bomure, what should they do if someone bullied their tribe? He originally wanted to kill Yang Qindong, but not only did he fail to hurt Yang Qindong in the slightest, he even lost his own Bomure. This result made him angry and unwilling to accept it, and he cursed loudly, F***ck. This was the final voice of the once ambitious and ruthless character. After shouting this sentence, he exhausted the last bit of strength in his body and turned around. Because of this, the shrapnel penetrated deep into his body. Yeshen didn't care about all this. He just looked up at the sky. At this time, the sky in his eyes was so blue and clear that people couldn't help but linger back and forth. Cough. With a light cough, blood flowed out from the corner of Yeshen's mouth, and then more and more blood flowed out. Slowly, Yeshen died with his eyes wide open. Perhaps when he died, his heart was full of unwillingness, so he couldn't close his eyes in peace. In midair, Yang Qindong finally stopped shooting. As far as the eye could see, it was difficult to find a single living person in the huge battlefield. Apart from a few lucky warhorses circling in place, there were no other living creatures in sight. Why did you seek your own death? Yang Qindong, who had calmed down, looked at the massacre in front of him and couldn't help but shake his head. He was not a bloodthirsty person, but there were some things that he had to do. Unknowingly, the warrior 10 had disappeared. Yang Qindong untied the reins of the white dragon tied to the tree stump and rode it back to the central camp. From the time Yang Qindong left until his return, nearly 4 hours had passed. For nearly 4 hours, the people in the central camp were worried about his safety. Only when Yang Qindong returned unharmed did everyone breathe a sigh of relief. Then Yang Qindong saw a lot of people cleaning up the battlefield. 1,000 Walla cavalry launched an attack on the main camp. Although they had the advantage in numbers, they were facing the black cavalry dragon guards who were wielding the 95 style. In the end, not a single one of them was left alive as corpses. Ba Daojiang came forward and reported the battle. Then he remembered the Walla cavalry and couldn't help but ask curiously, "Sixth young master, was it Yeshen who came?" Yang Qindong knew what he wanted to ask. He also knew that some things couldn't be hidden. After all, more than 20,000 people died. If they didn't deal with it properly, it would be a big problem if there was a plague. Yang Qindong said that he wanted to say it, but he could choose to say it. Yes, it was Yeshen who came, but he's already dead. Most of his cavalry was also killed by our ambush. It's just that they still have things to do, so they left in a hurry. How about this, you take half of the people to clean up the battlefield. Alright, there are too many corpses. We don't have enough people, so we can burn them. Hearing that the ambush had left, Ba Daojiang didn't ask any more questions. In his opinion, this was a normal thing. After all, their opponent this time was the 300,000 cavalry of the Khanate. Although they had 400,000 soldiers and had a slight advantage, they weren't as familiar with the terrain as the enemy. Moreover, even in a war, one should use all their strength and not hold back at all. Ba Daojiang nodded understandingly. Then he led 100 black cavalry and 600 to 700 medical personnel to the battlefield in the small forest. However, when they arrived at the battlefield, although many of them had already experienced large and small battles, some of them couldn't help but vomit on the ground. The situation on the battlefield was simply too tragic. There were countless people with broken limbs, and dead limbs were strewn all over the place. It was like a living hell. Ba Daojiang didn't vomit. After a long period of training, his tolerance in this aspect was very high. However, what he couldn't understand was why he didn't see any corpses of his own soldiers on the battlefield. More than 20,000 enemy cavalry died here, and they were the elites of the Wara. They were also people who had survived countless battles. They shouldn't have been unable to fight back. Could it be that their corpses had been carried away? Well, that was the only possibility. However, which army could do this? From the looks of the battlefield, there were many deep craters caused by cannons. It should be the work of the Lung Feng division, who cooperated with them. Ba Daojiang had some doubts in his heart, but considering that all of this was arranged by the sixth young master, he didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he started to burn the corpses. Whether it was Ivan's rebellion or Yeshin's sudden appearance, it didn't affect the battlefield at all. On the main battlefield, it didn't have much of an effect. The soldiers also didn't expect that their southern Wu king would encounter danger one after another in such a short time. At this time, they didn't know that they were fighting with the Khanate army or preparing to fight. The two divisions of Russia and Meng had already gathered their forces and their strength had increased greatly. Meng, he was able to lead 40,000 soldiers because of Yang Qindong's favor. This number was even more than the number of tribesmen he had before. Because of this, he decided to perform well. This battle was the time for him to prove his ability. Because of this, Meng fought very fiercely as soon as they arrived. Both sides were people who lived on horseback and the battle was very lively. Victory and defeat couldn't be decided in a short time. However, the five-star army's fighting spirit was different from the Khanate army's passive fighting spirit. Gradually, the scales of victory began to shift towards the five-star army's side. This was the effect produced by the difference in the system. Let's talk about the Khanate army first. They had no choice but to fight. It seemed like they were protecting their own territory and were acting in a righteous manner. However, these Khanates were all aristocrats, which meant that 90% of the wealth was in the hands of less than 5% of the nobles. Ordinary people could only fight for the remaining 10% of the wealth with 95% of the population. Chapter 1498. Under such an unequal situation, even if the Mongol cavalry achieved military merits, the rewards they received were few and far between. This caused them to lose their motivation because they were not fighting for themselves, but for the nobles and aristocrats. Looking at the five-star army, it looked like they were the invaders and should belong to the unjust side, but the excellent treatment of soldiers and military merit system filled everyone with motivation and confidence. Through military merit they could let themselves and their families live better lives. As long as they worked hard and dared to risk their lives, they might be able to obtain more. Moreover, the five-star army's military rules were there, so there was no need to worry about anyone stealing your military merit, because if that was the case, you could appeal to the military inspection department. Once it was verified, not only would your military merit be returned, but whoever took the merit would also be punished. Even if the person who took the merit was a battalion commander, regiment commander, or even a division commander, they would still be treated equally. Like this, who would dare to break this taboo, who would dare to cross the line? This protected the rights of the ordinary soldiers, so that they would not shed blood or cry when fighting with their lives on the line. Under the highly stimulating military merit system, everyone wished that they could go to the battlefield every day. Under this kind of mentality, compared to the Khanate Alliance army soldiers who were just muddling along, the results of the battle would naturally be different. Not to mention the world's first cavalry army's 4th Division commander, Sukuda, had suddenly arrived on the battlefield. Moreover, he had unrestrainedly launched an attack from the flank. It had to be said that the Khanate Alliance army scouts were not incompetent. They had already noticed a group of 10,000 cavalry that had suddenly charged in from the other side of the battlefield. However, the analysis of the higher-ups was that this group of 10,000 cavalry would definitely meet up with the Mongol-Russian army on the other side before launching an attack. This erroneous analysis caused them to be caught off guard. As a result, when the sky turned dark, Su Kuda led his army without stopping to rest. After arriving at the battlefield, they immediately threw themselves into the battle and disrupted the Khanate's allied forces' arrangements. Moreover, the world's first cavalry army had 7-star crossbows, and the soldiers' quality was very high. They were skilled in horsemanship, and their blade techniques were exquisite. They also took the initiative to attack, making the first move to gain the upper hand. Therefore, when they appeared, they dealt a heavy blow to the Khanate Alliance army. By the time they reacted and began to deploy their cavalry to defend the battlefield, they were already one step behind the enemy. It's our reinforcements, the elite 4th Division of the 1st World Cavalry Army. Nicholas and received the news at the same time. After looking at each other, they made the same decision. They would immediately take advantage of the situation to launch a counterattack. They would cooperate with the world's 1st Cavalry Army to give the enemy a heavy blow. Perhaps this would be a good opportunity to annihilate the enemy. Immediately, the Russian and Mongol divisions blew the horn for the charge. Tens of thousands of cavalry pressed forward like an avalanche, charging into the main camp of the Khanate Alliance. While the battle here was in full swing on the other main battlefield, the two sides were also at daggers drawn, ready to fight at any time. The two divisions of Lungfeng were surrounded. Two mixed cavalry divisions of the 3rd Army were also surrounded, totaling around 30,000 people. The one who surrounded them was Hazen Khan of the Ilkhanate. He brought along 70,000 cavalrymen from his own country and 20,000 cavalrymen from the Kazakh Khanate. A total of 90,000 people formed a huge encirclement. With 3 times the number of troops, they held the initiative. If it wasn't for the fact that the sky was already dark, they would have already launched their charge. Order all the troops to be on duty at night. Don't allow a single member of the 5-star army to escape, Hazen Khan said with a smug look on his face. Previously, Alating had risked his life to learn of the 5-star army's attack plan from Ivan. Others didn't believe it, but he did. He had arranged his army here in advance, and sure enough, a 30,000-strong army of the 5-star army was passing by. But they were blocked by him and were completely surrounded. Although 30,000 people weren't too important for the 5-star army, who had an army of 400,000. However, if he could wipe out all 30,000 people here, it would be a big victory. When the Khanate Alliance army held a meeting, Hazen Khan, would be able to straighten his back. Looking at the pitch-black night outside, Harsenhan was a little worried at this time. He was afraid that the 5-star army would choose to break out in the middle of the night. Therefore, he ordered them to be on guard and not allow a single member of the 5-star army to escape from their encirclement. The sky will brighten soon. At that time it will be time for our blades to drink blood. Hazen Khan chuckled as he looked forward to it. Compared to the nervousness of the Khanate Alliance army, the 30,000 5-star army soldiers weren't idle either. However, they didn't have any intention of breaking out of the encirclement. Instead, they dug trenches throughout the night. The entire 2 divisions of Lungfeng were here. If they wanted to display their advantage, they needed enough trenches. Only then could they display their powerful firepower. As for the enemies surrounding them, Division Commander Xiao Feng didn't have any misgivings. He thought that the number of Khanate Alliance army cavalry surrounding them was still too small. There were less than 100,000 people and it wasn't enough for them to eat. Of course, according to the rules, regardless of whether they thought highly of the Khanate Alliance army on the outside, since they had discovered the enemy's main force and were surrounded, they had to report this matter. Moreover, they had to spread the news to their allies nearby. Commander Wu Sheng of the 3rd Army, who was 150 kilometers west of them, received the news. What? Our 2 mixed cavalry divisions are surrounded? Then we have to go and save them. Immediately send a telegram to the 6th young master and tell him our thoughts. Xiao Feng became excited after receiving the news. It could be said that his luck wasn't very good. They had been out for 2 days and had passed through many places, but they hadn't encountered the Khanate Alliance army cavalry. This could only mean that they had gone in the wrong direction. Since that was the case, they had to adjust their direction. But where exactly to go was also a problem that gave him a headache. Now that they had learned that the 2 divisions of the Cold Front Division were surrounded, they had found one of the main forces of the Khanate Alliance army. Even if they couldn't eat the meat, they could at least drink the soup. With this thought in mind, Wu Sheng sent a telegram to Yang Qindong to ask for instructions on the pretext of saving his 2 mixed cavalry divisions. In the central camp, the danger was already far away. Yang Qindong had also returned to his own tent. Wang Shan, the director of the communications department, was also in the tent. He was delivering the received telegrams to Yang Chendong so that Yang Chendong could better understand the situation of the battlefield. Yang Chendong saw the telegram from the Third Army as soon as it arrived. How could he not see that Wu Sheng couldn't find the enemy's main force and wanted to use this opportunity to get a share of the loot? If any other officer had made such a request, he would naturally refuse. This piece of meat was found by the 2 divisions of the Cold Front Division, so how could anyone else snatch the benefits? But since it was a telegram from Wu Sheng, it was a different story. Speaking of which, Yang Chendong felt that he had let Wu Sheng down. He had left him for 10 years in Eastern Europe without any reinforcements. He had to face the 2 behemoths of the Golden Horde and the Rossi Principalities. He could imagine how difficult it must have been. Speaking of which, Wu Sheng's Third Army could also be called the Third Army of the Cold Front Division. But because they had been separated for so long, many excellent soldiers had been killed in battle. That was why they were no longer as strong as they used to be. Although they had recovered from the recruitment, their fighting strength was far from what it used to be. Right now, they wanted to make a contribution. Moreover, there were 20,000 soldiers from the Third Army surrounded. It was reasonable for them to send reinforcements. Okay, send a telegram to Commander Wu Sheng and agree to his request. Yang Chendong gave his answer after some consideration. If Wu Sheng was allowed to go, then the other armies wouldn't be so lucky. They would have to find their own opportunities. In contrast, the commander of the world's first cavalry army, Jianghu, had his own plans. As the strongest army in the world of cold weapons, Jianghu had his own pride. He couldn't do things like knowing the intelligence of others. What he needed to do was to make use of his own advantages and make greater contributions. What were the advantages of the world's first cavalry army? Without a doubt, they had the fastest war horses and the strongest cavalry, as well as the 7-star crossbow, which was an excellent weapon for shooting enemies at close range. With so many advantages, they were destined to not be an ordinary army. Only greater contributions were worthy of them. And what was this contribution? In Tianhu's eyes, it was to directly attack the enemy's den and take down the capital of the Ilkhanate, Dabuli. Speaking of which, the Ilkhanate had long been destroyed. They were now known as the Zarathir dynasty, and their capital was in Dabuli. This name was nothing more than a means used by Harsan Khan to maintain the same status as the other Khanates. This time, in order to stop the 5-star army from coming to the west, Harsan Khan had mobilized almost all the forces that could be mobilized within the kingdom, and then sent his troops out of the capital. He wanted to stop the 5-star army outside and even severely injure them. The idea was good, but the reality was cruel. How could they achieve it just by thinking? For this battle, Harsan Khan had conscripted all the men above the age of 14 in the country, making their capital Dabuli very empty. According to the information from the intelligence department, there were less than 5,000 soldiers in the city. This was an opportunity. As long as they were fast, it was very likely that they would be able to take down Dabuli and completely cut off the connection between Harsan Khan and his base. At that time, the enemy would be in chaos when they heard the news. That would be the time for the 5-star army to win. Chapter 1499. It was easy to take down Tabulia, but the subsequent matters would be troublesome. The other Khanates would also not sit back and watch such a thing happen. They would definitely send their troops here and even surround them. They would not allow the 5-star army to gain a foothold in the city. In other words, there was a risk in doing this. If they did not do well, they might be surrounded. Others might be afraid, but the world's first cavalry army led by Tianhu would not be afraid. To him, this kind of challenge was exciting enough to show the true strength of the world's first cavalry army. Of course, Tianhu was not a blindly arrogant person. Before taking action, he decided to accumulate more strength. For example, he would mobilize the 5 divisions under him to strengthen his own strength. This was like forging iron, one needed to be strong. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th divisions rushed over after receiving the order. Only the 4th division was busy helping the Russian and Mongolian divisions. They did not have the chance to come and help. Because of this, Tianhu decided not to wait for them. After all, speed was the most important thing in war. Opportunities on the battlefield were fleeting. It was impossible to wait for someone. Pass down the order. The army is to attack. The target is Tabulia city, the capital of the Ilkhanate. Tianhu did not want to wait any longer. Time waits for no one. Therefore, after he gave the order, the 45,000 soldiers of the world's first cavalry army quickly approached Tabulia city from all directions. The world's first cavalry army and the Cold Front 3rd Cavalry Army both moved. Everyone had their own target. This was where the strength of Yang Qindong's battlefield command came into play. Unless there was a complete plan, the generals could do whatever they wanted on the battlefield. Unless there was no other choice, Yang Qindong would not blindly give orders. This was because he knew that sometimes, a delay in giving orders could cause the fruits of victory to be lost. In order to prevent this from happening, he would not give orders. Instead, he would let the division commanders do what they wanted. Jianghu and the others were already used to this method of command. Therefore, after they made the decision, they only needed to report the purpose of their trip via telegram before taking action. Compared to the Third Corps of the Cold Front, which was drinking soup, the world's first corps of cavalry had to launch a surprise attack. Beta Persei led 1,800 black cavalry soldiers, as well as the troops of Ming 4 Regiment Baruch and Ming 5 Regiment Wuxia that they had encountered on the battlefield. They were rushing towards the Norman Khanate day and night. Although it was called the Norman Khanate, it was nothing more than a small country with a population of less than 800,000 people. Or rather, it was just a large tribe. It was only because their location was not bad, belonging to the borderlands, that they were not too valuable, that they were not affected by the chaos and were not destroyed. This time, the fearless Beta Persei had arrived. It was destined that the Norman Khanate would not be able to escape the fate of destruction. Of course, their target this time was the Ilkhanate. If it were someone else, they would not cause trouble. Even Tian, who had only taken the capital of the Ilkhanate, which was already somewhat out of the battlefield. However, the fearless young heir had indeed pointed his troops at the Norman Khanate. Just this action alone was completely out of everyone's expectations. When Beta Persei decided to do this, it was because he thought that his 400,000 men, the Air Force, and the elite forces of the Cold Front would be a waste of talent to deal with the Khanate's allied forces that barely managed to gather 300,000 cavalrymen. This kind of battlefield could not satisfy him. There was no space for him to display his skills. Therefore, after looking at the map, he decided to attack the Norman Khanate. But after all, he only had 1,800 cavalrymen. Although they were the most elite black cavalry, their strength was still too weak. Coincidentally, he had learned the location of Ming 4 Regiment and Ming 5 Regiment commander through the help of the Air Force. He immediately rushed over and asked the 2 division commanders to assist him. Who was Beta Persei? It was not an exaggeration to say that he was Yang Qindong's shadow. He was one of the closest people to him. As the saying went, the gate of the Prime Minister was a 7th-ranked official, not to mention an important position like Beta Persei. Towards the request of such a person as former surrendered generals, how could Barry and U2 dare to refuse? After Younger spoke to them, the 2 of them readily agreed. Not only that, they also followed Younger's instructions and shut down the military radio stations. After that, the 80,000-plus soldiers of the 3 armies seemed to have suddenly disappeared. They left the battlefield and headed straight for the Norman Khanate at an oblique angle. After 3 days and 3 nights of hurrying, they had already arrived at the Norman Khanate. In order not to alert the enemy and let the enemy be on guard, Beta Persei led the army to choose a small path. Thus, when they suddenly appeared in front of the capital of the Norman Khanate on the 6th day, the people there were frightened. Outside the city, 80,000 Han soldiers holding the 5-star flag suddenly appeared like divine soldiers descending from the sky, causing Saihan to turn pale with fright. He immediately sent his general Tuyabai out of the city to meet the enemy. He wanted to take advantage of the fact that the 5-star army had not yet gained a firm foothold and take the initiative. Tuyabai was a general of the Norman Khanate and was very brave. Usually, 4 or 5 people would not be able to get close to him. Such a person naturally had his own pride. When he appeared on the battlefield, he immediately rushed forward on horseback, clamoring to challenge the generals of the 5-star army. Ba Lu and Wu Tuan naturally could not tolerate this. This was a very good opportunity to show off in front of Beta Persei, so they did not want to let it go. While the 2 of them were still thinking about who would rush out to fight, Beta Persei, who was wearing a purple cloak, had already rushed out. This was not the first time Beta Persei had encountered this kind of one-on-one battle. He gradually fell in love with this kind of feeling. Especially when he chopped off the enemy's head with his sword and the soldiers on his side let out a deafening roar, which filled him with a sense of satisfaction. Now that someone actually wanted to challenge him to a one-on-one battle, how could he not satisfy such a request? Laughing loudly, he spurred his horse out. In the Black Cavalry camp, not only were the first Captain Chiu Vi and the second Captain Dao Xiao not worried, they were even having an intense discussion, arguing about how long it would take for Beta Persei to kill the enemy general. 15 rounds should be about right, Chiu Vi imitated Yang Qindong and said confidently. I say 10 rounds should be enough. Dao Xiao raised a different opinion, his face also showing a confident smile that resembled Yang Qindong's. The two of them each expressed their own opinions, looking as if they would not give in to the other. Ba Lu and Wu Tuo were shocked by this scene. This was a battlefield, not a drill. How could they be so relaxed and natural, as if they did not take Beta Persei's life seriously? Were they really that confident? While the two of them were still curious and puzzled, Beta Persei had already collided with Tuyabai on the battlefield. As the warhorses crossed each other, a sword and a spear clashed and separated. Tuyabai used a long spear, and at a glance, it was obvious that he was a powerful general. He relied on this great strength to take down Beta Persei's celestial saber. But in terms of strength, how could Beta Persei be afraid of others? Seeing the other party's long spear coming, he deliberately held back half of his strength and met the other party head-on. Clang! With one clash, the celestial saber in Beta Persei's hand trembled. Because of the great force, he almost fell off his horse. Ha ha ha! Tuyabai, who had used all of his strength, did not know that the previous attack was just a probing move. He thought that this was Yang Er's full strength, and could not help but feel a surge of confidence, once again thrusting his spear forward. After the test just now, both of them knew what was going on. Beta Persei did not believe that the other party would have the same idea as him. This could be seen from the laughter just now. Since he was so proud, now was the time for him to cry. Beta Persei, who was riding on the horse, calmed his dantian and switched his sword to his left hand. Just as the two horses were about to pass each other, he suddenly stretched out his right arm and touched the other party's long spear. Beta Persei dared to do this because he was confident in his own strength and the plate armor on his body. This was the armor that the engineers of Crimson City's munitions factory spent a lot of effort and went through countless improvements. It could be said that it was invulnerable. With this, he could ignore any attack from the other party for a short period of time. Beta Persei did not dodge and stretched out his hand to meet the attack, which was greatly beyond Tuyabai's expectations. In such a short time, his spear had already swept across Beta Persei's body. Sure enough, the spear did not pierce through the armor but only scratched it. Seeing that his attack had failed, Tuyabai instinctively retracted his spear. But at this time, Beta Persei's right arm, which had already stretched out, began to exert force and suddenly grabbed the spear. Tuyabai's body uncontrollably moved forward and came in front of Beta Persei. At this moment, the distance between the two sides was less than 40 centimeters. Beta Persei laughed and waved his left arm. Tuyabai screamed and a big head flew into the air. Tuyabai's body fell to the ground and died in battle. It had only been 2 rounds. The first round was a test, the second round was a killing move, and it was a success. Seeing this scene in the eyes of the two generals, Barry and Wu Tuo, they were naturally shocked. Even Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao shut their mouths at this moment. After all, it was far beyond their expectations to kill the enemy general so quickly. After killing Tuyabai, Yang Er took the opportunity to point his saber forward and roared, "Soldiers, follow me and kill." Yang Er's saber was pointed forward and he shouted, "Soldiers, follow me and kill." Kill. The first to rush out were the 1,800 black cavalry soldiers. They had long been used to attacking in any situation and environment. After years of hard training, even when they were sleeping, they would jump up and draw their swords when they heard the general's order. Chapter 1500. 1,800 black cavalry, armed to the teeth, swarmed out like a black dragon and charged towards the capital of the Norman Khaganate. This scene caused the enemy cavalry to turn and flee. Even their general, Tuyabai, had his head chopped off in just 2 rounds. They did not think that they were that powerful. The cavalry of the Khaganate turned and fled, giving Beta Persei and the black cavalry an opportunity. They galloped their horses and followed the Mongol cavalry into the city. On the city gate tower, Saihanhan saw all of this with his eyes. When he saw the 5-star army charging into the city so easily, he angrily shouted, "Shoot the arrows, shoot the arrows. Don't let them enter the city. Kill them and close the gates." Saihanhan's reaction was very fast. The guards beside him were also very supportive. They took out their bows and shot down the city wall, trying to stop the black cavalry from advancing. In order to achieve their goal, some of the black cavalry soldiers who were close to the black cavalry also became their targets. Arrows rained down like rain. The Mongol cavalrymen, who were poorly equipped and defenseless, were shot by the arrows. All of them cried out in pain and fell from their horses. On the other hand, the black cavalry's armor was very good. The arrows did not have much effect on them. Kill anyone who approaches the city gate. Create the conditions for the rest of the army to enter the city. Yang was riding on his warhorse. He waved his arms and cut down 3 Mongol cavalrymen who charged at him. Then he shouted at the other Black Knights and Dragon Guards. With Beta Persei's order, a group of 100 black cavalry soldiers immediately arrived in front of the city gate. They formed a tight formation and faced the Mongol cavalry who came to attack the city gate. Crossbows appeared in the hands of the black cavalry soldiers. This kind of crossbow, which had great lethality at close range, was very suitable to deal with the current situation. With someone guarding the city gate, Beta Persei led the other black cavalry soldiers into the city. He wanted to find out where the palace was, but he did not expect to hear someone shouting for the Khan to leave quickly. Following Yang Qindong would give him a chance to learn. Although Beta Persei had a headache whenever he talked about learning and even wanted to sleep, he could still understand some simple Mongolian words by staying by Yang Qindong's side every day. It was because he heard this voice that Beta Persei looked over and saw many people escorting a person down the city wall. Looking at the other party's clothes, he could tell that he was either rich or noble. Hey, where are you going? Beta Persei was not sure of the other party's true identity. He felt that it should not be simple, so he turned his horse around and rushed over with the celestial armament sword in hand. Beta Persei turned around and Xiu Vi Dao Xiao and the others who followed him immediately followed. This caused the black cavalry to follow in large numbers. When Saihanhan saw all of this, he turned pale with fright. He thought that his identity had been exposed and immediately shouted, "Guards, stop them, stop them." There was no lack of loyal guards among the guards. After hearing Saihanhan's shout, hundreds of people rushed out with swords and spears. It looked quite imposing. However, these guards came in a hurry and did not even ride on war horses. How could they be a match for the most elite black cavalry in the 5-star army? In just a single exchange, dozens of heads and bodies were separated from their bodies. The impact of these hundreds of guards was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. The effect was really limited. This also allowed Beta Persei to quickly rush in front of Saihanhan. Saihanhan, the dignified great Khan of the clan, was in a very sorry state at this moment. He did not even swing his sword, even though he was already holding a sharp sword in his hand. Second Master Yang's big hand grabbed him and pressed him down on the horse. "No, don't kill me, I'm Saihanhan, I surrender." Saihanhan had just witnessed the scene of Beta Persei killing Tuyabai. At this moment, he was extremely scared and hurriedly begged for mercy in Mongolian. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." Beta Persei did not understand so much Mongolian at once. In a fit of anger he roared. At this moment, coupled with the murderous aura on his body, Saihanhan had the urge to faint. "Don't kill me, I'm Saihanhan, I'm the great Khan of the Norman Khanate. I'm willing to surrender, I surrender." In a hurry, Saihanhan could only repeat in Chinese. Although it was not very authentic and was even a little talkative, this time Beta Persei really heard it clearly. He did not expect that the person he casually grabbed would be the great Khan. He immediately laughed and said, "Ha, God is really taking care of me. That's for the best. Tell your men to put down their weapons immediately. I'll chop off one of your fingers if they're late." Hearing Beta Persei's thunderous voice, Saihanhan kept nodding. "Yes, I'll tell them to surrender right away. Wait a moment." In order to save his life, Saihanhan sat on his horse and began to shout loudly in Mongolian. With his identity as the Khan, he ordered his men to put down their weapons and surrender to the 5-star army. The great Khan's orders still had a lot of prestige in the tribe. Perhaps if he told them to throw away their lives, they would still fuss about it. But if he said to surrender in order to save their lives, not many people would disobey the order. Especially when the 5-star army's performance was so brave and powerful. In addition, they had long heard all kinds of rumors about the 5-star army's power. Immediately, everyone threw down their weapons and surrendered, squatting on the ground. When Barry and Yuchuo led the army into the city, they saw the scene of the entire city kneeling on the ground. This result shocked the 2 division commanders. When they looked at Beta Persei, their eyes were full of worship. With just 1,800 cavalrymen, not only did they charge into the city and capture the Khan, they also made the 10,000 cavalrymen surrender and kneel on the ground. If it didn't happen in front of their eyes, they wouldn't believe it even if someone else told them. On the contrary, Beta Persei, who was worshipped, was not surprised at all. Leading the most elite black cavalry of the 5-star army, he would not be surprised at anything. "Okay, immediately seal off the entire city. Don't spread the news here. check the captured goods, especially the food, and be ready to attack again. Taking down the Norman Khanate was naturally not Beta Persei's ultimate goal. In his eyes, the real boss was the great Khan of the Timur Empire, Amur. As long as he captured him, the mission would be considered complete. Come, immediately report this matter to the young master. At the same time, inform him of our plan. Plan? Is it about the surprise attack on the Timur Empire? Captain Chiu V, who was following beside him, asked excitedly. That's right. Beta Persei nodded, and then his eyes were filled with excitement. If this matter could really be accomplished, then there was no doubt that this time he would be able to show his face. It would also be enough to prove that he was a real valiant general and not just a subordinate of the young master. In the main tent, the telegram was quickly sent to Yang Qindong. Director Wang Shan, who was in charge of delivering the telegram, also said excitedly, "Sixth young master, look, Brother Beta Persei has made a meritorious service again." Ah, that's right. His surprise attack was indeed very unexpected. It's just that. Yang Qindong did not say what it was. However, Wang Shan could sense that Yang Qindong was worried about whether or not he would be able to launch a surprise attack on the Timur Empire. Yang Qindong was indeed a little worried. After all, although the Norman Khanate had the name of a country, it was actually just a small tribe. The total army of the whole country was less than 100,000 people. They had also sent a large number of troops to support the eastern and main lines, so they basically did not have many troops in the capital. However, the Timur Empire was completely different. Their influence was so great that it was not inferior to the Golden Horde. Their capital, Herat, located in the northwest of Afghanistan, was heavily guarded. It was not a place that could be taken down easily. If things were not handled well, they might fall into a siege, which would be very dangerous. Yang Qindong was not a person who did not take risks, but that was because he had Datsang by his side, so he had no scruples. In contrast, Beta Persei only had a little more than 80,000 troops, so it would be very difficult for him to succeed. Sixth young master, how should I reply? Wang Shan saw that Yang Qindong did not speak for a long time, so he asked softly. Agree to Beta Persei's request. But tell him that it would be best if it can be done. If it can't be done, then immediately retreat and I will personally pick him up. Yang Qindong's expression instantly became much more serious, and his eyes were filled with fighting spirit. Even Beta Persei was not afraid of danger, so what did he have to be afraid of? At worst, he could just use Datsang's power. Sixth young master wants to kiss him? Hearing Yang Qindong's answer, Wang Shan's eyes widened. Yes, in that case, immediately notify the Black Cavalry Group. We will prepare to set out tonight and meet up with the 2nd Division of the Cold Front. At this time, Yang Qindong had already made up his mind. If he wanted to do it, then he would do it big. He could even destroy the Golden Horde, so what was there to be afraid of with the Timur Empire? Yes. Wang Shan was also affected by this mood, and immediately stood at attention and went out to notify the others. At this time, the 2nd Division of the Cold Front that Yang Qindong had chosen had already fought with Harsenhan's army, and the results were very good. The 2nd Division of the Cold Front was surrounded, and with the help of the 2 mixed cavalry divisions of the 3rd Army, they dug out the trenches they needed overnight. Early the next morning, after Harsenhan ordered the 100,000 troops to attack, the 2nd Division of the Cold Front was in the limelight. They did not need the help of the 2 mixed cavalry divisions, and they easily repelled the enemy's attacks again and again. Chapter 1501. Under the barrage of muskets, not a single cavalryman was able to get within 300 steps of the trenches. The battle lasted from day to night. In the end, the Khaganate army left behind about 12,000 corpses before retreating helplessly. On the other hand, the Cold Front army didn't suffer a single casualty. In fact, the marksmanship of the soldiers was even better. It was said that sharpshooters were trained by bullets, but that was only true for fixed targets. Occasionally there would be moving targets. For example, a real target like this was something that even the sharpshooters of the future envied. In order to train the soldiers' marksmanship and take into account that the enemy's charge wasn't too loud, Commander Xiao Feng conducted actual combat training in units of battalions. Not only did this save bullets to a certain extent, it also preserved the soldiers' stamina to the greatest extent. They were surrounded on all sides and had only sent out 4 battalions of soldiers. In this kind of battlefield, they would have no problem holding out for a long time. Not to mention, before they were surrounded, they had brought 20 days' worth of rations. Unlike the Mongolian army, they had instant noodles, biscuits, ham sausages, canned food, and so on. Even if they didn't have a chance to start a fire, they could still eat until they were full. This was the best way to preserve their stamina and fighting spirit. Seeing that Cold Front's 2nd Regiment had killed more enemies than their entire regiment, the 1st Regiment's commander Min Fu and the 2nd Regiment's commander Lori were envious. They came up to Xiao Feng and asked sincerely, "General Xiao, our commander has sent a telegram saying that he's on his way with the army, but we don't know when we'll launch our counterattack." "There's no rush." Xiao Feng, who carried the rank of Major General, smiled and shook his head. It was rare to have an opportunity like this to train the soldiers. He wanted to let the soldiers of the division go through a sieve. This would be a great help in increasing the fighting strength of the division. Although they were all division commanders, the Cold Front Division's commander had the rank of Major General. Only they and the commander of the world's #1 cavalry army could enjoy this kind of treatment. This was enough to prove the strength of the two armies. On the other hand, the other division commanders were at most senior colonels. In comparison, the difference in status between the two sides was obvious. Even though Major General Xiao Feng said this, Min Fu and Lorui, who were also division commanders but only had the rank of 2 bars and 4 bars, couldn't say anything. When it was almost daybreak, the two division commanders were suddenly called into the tent by Xiao Feng. Through their narration, the decision made last night was changed. "Commander Min, Commander Luo, please get ready. Let the soldiers eat in advance and prepare for the counterattack." The reason why the situation changed so quickly was naturally not only because the 3rd Corps commander Wu Sheng had already brought the main force of the army to the periphery of the battlefield, ready to provide support at any time. The main reason was that Yang Qindong had sent a telegram. No one in the 5-star army had the right to question or be dissatisfied with Yang Qindong's orders. This was a kind of respect, a kind of prestige accumulated over a long period of battle. There was another mission for him to finish the battle as quickly as possible. As soon as the telegram was delivered, Xiao Feng knew what to do next. He then called for Min Fu and the other 2 teachers to discuss the matter of counterattacking. The 3 division commanders sat together. The candlelight in the tent was lit for half an hour until the messenger came to report that the soldiers had already eaten breakfast and could attack at any time. The 3 division commanders looked at each other and nodded heavily. After telling each other to pay attention to safety, they walked out of the tent. Outside the encirclement, Harsin Han's face was a bit ugly. He only went to sleep at midnight, but even so, he still tossed and turned in bed for nearly an hour before falling asleep. It wasn't strange for him to have such a performance. He thought that he had the upper hand, but after attacking for a day, not only did he lose 15% of his strength, he didn't even hurt a single hair on the enemy's head. This was the first time he had encountered such a battle in his life. Even when facing the 5-star army in the east, although they were defeated time and time again, they were still able to injure some of the enemy. It wasn't like this time. They were clearly the attacking side, but they could only passively take a beating. He found a few of his subordinates to discuss until midnight, but they still couldn't come up with a better plan. Everyone finally decided to observe carefully the next day to see if they could find a direction to attack. Only then did they go to sleep. At this time, the sky was beginning to brighten. But even so, Harsin Han still didn't have the intention to get up. He didn't sleep well last night, so he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to sleep a little longer to ensure that he had enough energy to deal with various matters during the day. Whoosh, boom. Harsin Han, who did not want to get out of bed, was about to lie down for a while. Suddenly, a sharp whistling sound rang out beside his ear. Following that, he felt the bedboard shake. The huge explosion caused him to be unable to sleep peacefully. What's going on? What's going on? The frightened Harsin Han got off the bed with his clothes in disarray. He rushed out of the tent and wanted to ask the guard outside what was going on outside. However, what he saw next made him unable to ask any more questions. He could see with his own eyes the cannonballs exploding within the camp, destroying one tent after another. One of the cannonballs was less than 40 steps away from his main tent. Standing in front of the main tent, he could even feel the shockwave from the explosion. In comparison, the surrounding Mongol soldiers weren't much better off. Some of them were directly hit by the cannonballs and some of them were injured by the shrapnel. Although they didn't die immediately, they breathed out more than they breathed in. Of course, most of them were those who had suffered minor injuries. They were bleeding. The wounds were not big, and there was only a small piece of shrapnel embedded in their bodies. However, if the shrapnel was not taken out, the prolonged bleeding would eventually kill them. It could be said that there was no safe place to hide under the cannonballs. When the cannonballs landed on the Mongol camp, it was already a mess. The general didn't give any orders and the soldiers didn't have the will to fight. Where did the cannonballs come from? Didn't you say that the cannonballs of the 5-star army weren't surrounded by us? Seeing the hellish scene in front of him, Harsin Han angrily asked. This. A few generals who had run to the main tent lowered their heads. Previously, because the cannonballs of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment were well hidden within the army, and because they didn't encounter any cannonballs yesterday, they were certain of this. But now it seemed like they had been tricked. Harsin Han, who had vented his anger, knew that this wasn't the time to ask for responsibility. He said, "Go back to the army and think of a way to gather the troops. Be prepared for battle." This Khan is thinking that the cannonballs are just a prelude. Perhaps their real counterattack is coming. Counterattack? They only have 30,000 men and we have 80,000. Will they counterattack? This sentence attracted the suspicion of the generals. Even at this time, his subordinates still doubted his words. This made Harsin Han very angry. He knew that it was because of his usual actions that his subordinates didn't trust him. If he wanted them to listen to him, he had to negotiate with them. As such, he had to change his tone and explain patiently. It was because of this explanation that the Mongol army lost the most crucial time. As the saying goes, speed is the most important thing in war. Sometimes, every minute and second on the battlefield was the key to victory. While Harsin Han was explaining to his subordinates, the first round of cannonballs of the 5-star army had ended. Following that, the cavalry began their charge. The 20,000 cavalry of the 2 mixed cavalry divisions had long been envious of the achievements of the 5-star army. Now it was finally their turn to perform. One by one, they galloped forward on their horses and shouted loudly. They also wanted to make a name for themselves. Great Khan, the 5-star army has indeed launched a counterattack. A young scout rode up to Harsin Han and reported the situation in a loud voice. Facts spoke louder than words. Harsin Han had said a lot earlier, but the generals didn't believe him. However, the facts had slapped them in the face. When the generals looked at Harsin Han, they all revealed looks of admiration. This time there was no need to say anything. The generals dispersed and began to gather their troops. The Mongol soldiers also had a certain amount of battle experience. When they saw the 5-star Legion Corps charging over, even without the command of their general, many of them were already prepared to charge. They turned their horses around and mounted their horses. They were prepared to engage in a bloody battle with the 5-star army at any time. Commander, the Mongol army's attention is on the interior. This is the time for us to charge. The 3rd Corps Nuzan Cavalry Division's commander Yella had already moved to the periphery of the Mongol army. At this time he stood beside Wu Sheng and asked for instructions. Good, give the order. All troops attack. Wu Sheng, who couldn't wait any longer, how could he not want to make a name for himself? Previously, under the pincer attack of the Golden Horde and the Ross Dukedom, they could only barely hold their ground. Now that they finally had a chance to make a name for themselves, how could he give it up? With a loud shout, he led his 3 divisions and 30,000 soldiers to charge towards the Mongol army from different directions. At this time, the Mongol army's main focus was on the 5-star army that was surrounded. Although they had arranged for some troops to be stationed at the outer perimeter, it was to prevent the other 5-star corps reinforcements from suddenly appearing and attacking them from both sides. However, with the chaos in the camp and the generals not returning in time, these soldiers had long forgotten about their previous mission. They only wanted to solve the problem in front of them. Now there was no one to defend behind them. When Wu Sheng appeared with his army, they were caught off guard. Chapter 1502. On the battlefield, the slightest accident could cost a person's life. The enemy troops suddenly appeared behind them, and they were charging ferociously. At this moment, the Mongol army had no choice but to send out a portion of their forces to block them. At this moment, the second wave of cannon fire arrived, causing the Mongol army, who had just regained their order, to fall into chaos once more. The timing was really accurate and it could be said to be perfect. The cannon fire disrupted the order of the Mongol army, and it also covered the shouts of the Mongol generals, causing them to be unable to gather their troops. In just 15 minutes, the 5-star army had formed a pincer attack. Facing such a situation, many of the Mongol soldiers were confused as to who they should fight. Taking advantage of the fact that the enemy had not formed a defensive formation, Wu Sheng's 3rd Legion charged into the Mongol army like a sharp blade, and they started their massacre. The reason why cavalry was so terrifying and had dominated the battlefield for a whole decade and a century was precisely because they were fast enough, their charge was fierce enough, and their lethality and destructive power were shocking and terrifying. Once they lost these advantages, they were no different from ordinary infantry waiting to be slaughtered. Without impulse there would be no speed. Without speed they would not be able to display their strength. Without strength there would be no killing power and no destructive power. They were just riding on horses. Facing the soldiers of the 3rd Legion, in just one exchange the Mongol army was cut down, and over 1,000 of them were injured. As the main force of the 3rd Legion continued to charge into the Mongol army, the number of casualties continued to increase. Block it, block it. Harsan Han also saw this shocking scene. When he saw the cavalrymen he was proud of being killed off one by one without the slightest ability to resist, he cried out in pain. The various Khans were like a chaotic animal kingdom, and there was only one rule of survival, which was the survival of the fittest. Whoever had the biggest fist was the boss, and this was what the Mongol army, which did not have much culture, valued. The reason why he could still make his voice heard in the Khaganate alliance was because he had these cavalry units. This was the fundamental reason why no one could ignore his existence. But now, these cavalrymen that he regarded as his lifeblood couldn't even withstand a single blow from the 5-star army. They were harvested like chives, and it was as if his flesh was being cut off. It made him feel extremely miserable. "We can't block them anymore, Khan, let's break out." The captain brought a group of soldiers in front of Harsan Han and begged. On the battlefield, once defeat was apparent, it was not something that could be changed by a single person's decision. That was the situation, and in front of such a situation, even Khan was like a leaf blown by the wind. "We can't block them?" Harsan Han murmured. Then, as if he had thought of something, his vision blurred, and he fell to the ground at an extremely fast speed. "Not good," Khan fainted. "Quickly come and help Khan up, we'll kill our way out." Seeing this scene, the captain of the bodyguards shouted in panic. Soon after, a group of bodyguards rushed forward and helped Harsan Han, who had indeed fainted from anger, onto his warhorse. After that, the group of bodyguards charged towards the direction where the 5-star army had fewer soldiers. The army was defeated like a landslide. From the moment the 3rd Star Army launched a pincer attack, and the enemy was helpless, the outcome of this battle was already decided. One side was meticulously planned, and the other side was forced to retaliate. This was equivalent to a country suddenly launching an attack. Furthermore, they did not declare war, and they had an even greater advantage in firepower. This battle only lasted for 8 hours, and before the sky turned dark, the battlefield was already filled with corpses and Mongolian prisoners. There were more than 80,000 Mongolian cavaliers, and after the battle, aside from nearly 10,000 who managed to escape in the chaos, around 13,000 died, 20,000 were injured, and the remaining 30,000 or so abandoned their weapons and knelt down to surrender. On the other hand, the 3rd Star Army lost less than 500 men, and about 4,000 were injured. With such a small sacrifice they managed to kill 80,000 enemies. Other than the help of the 2nd Cold Front Division, this also showed the strength of the 3rd Star Army. Clean up the battlefield and send a report to the 6th Young Master. At the same time, ask for other allies to come and take care of the prisoners. Wu Sheng, who had obtained a great victory, was elated as he gave the order to the reporter beside him. From the fact that Yang Qindong wanted to use the 2nd Cold Front Division, it was obvious that something big was going to happen. Wu Sheng did not want to miss such a good opportunity. He did not forget that the 3rd Star Army used to be the 3rd Cold Front Division, but because they had not returned for a long time, they had lost all their firearms. However, it did not matter. As long as they performed well enough, they would be able to return to the ranks of the Cold Front Division. At that time, the 3rd Star Army would be truly powerful. Yang Qindong, who was rushing over, heard about the situation here through a telegram. He immediately gave the order to report this matter to the entire army. At the same time, he ordered the nearby 3rd Star Army, Chiwen, to immediately rush over to the 3rd Star Army and the 2nd Cold Front Division to take over everything there. If it was said that Yang Qindong was still somewhat hesitant when Beta Persei suggested to attack the capital of the Timur Empire, Herat, then this victory gave him more confidence. He knew that the conditions of the battlefield had been formed, and it was time to complete the surprise attack. With the help of the 2nd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Star Army obtained a great victory over the Mongolian army, defeating 100,000 enemies. After this news was spread through the telegram, the commander of the 1st Star Army's 4th Division, Su Kuda, became anxious. Speaking of which, they had clashed with the enemy's main force earlier than anyone else. Moreover, they had also launched several attacks, but the results did not seem to be very good. Although from the results of the battle they had always had the upper hand, but they did not achieve their goal of heavily injuring the enemy. We can't continue like this. Isn't the First Star Army less than 200 li away from here? Send a message to them to come and support us. Su could have finally decided to send other reinforcements. This was not because he was afraid of the enemy, but because he wanted to use more advantages to annihilate the enemy. Just from this point alone, he already had the qualities of an excellent commander. He no longer cared about the fruits of victory in front of him. He was willing to share the credit with other allies, which was equivalent to having a view of the overall situation. Su Kuda was also preparing for the final attack. In contrast, Commander Tianhu had already obtained the fruits of victory. Under his surprise attack, he had successfully captured the capital of the Ilkhanate, Tabuli Tuqing. In order to achieve the goal of not letting the news leak out, the 4 divisions of the army attacked the 4 gates to ensure that no one could escape the city and spread the news. The world's #1 cavalry army was indeed worthy of being in existence, that was second only to the Black Cavalry in terms of cold weapons. From the moment they launched their attack to the moment they captured the entire Tabuli Tuqing, they had only used less than 4 hours. Furthermore, they had achieved their goal of not letting a single enemy escape. After quietly capturing the city, Tianhu did not let the army take down the old flag of the Ilkhanate. On the surface, the city did not look any different from before. This was him fishing, waiting for the enemy to walk into the trap. Although Tianhu did not know who would appear here, his intuition and the pattern of the battle told him that there would definitely be enemies here. After 6 days, not a single enemy appeared. Instead, many Mongolian soldiers and civilians were executed because they were hostile to the 5-star army. Letting the world's #1 cavalry army do the work of a third-rate army was indeed a waste of talent. Some of the soldiers had their own opinions about this. Looking at the battlefield, the other allied forces had already made contributions, but the world's #1 cavalry army had only chosen to wait, making them feel sullen. Regarding this, Tianhu used his aura to suppress it. However, at this moment his heart wavered a little. If he only obtained this bit of merit in this battle, then he was somewhat unqualified to be a commander. Finally, on the morning of the 7th day, the scouts outside the city reported that they had seen a large number of Mongolian soldiers outside the city. At this time they were moving in the direction of the city. Hearing that there was finally an enemy who had taken the bait, Tianhu immediately became spirited. The 5-star army soldiers in the city also changed from their previous dispirited state to full of vigor. At this time, about 5 li away from the city, a group of about 30,000 people was slowly making their way into the city. Leading them was the Ivan Khanate's Harsan Khan, as well as the 20,000 Kazakh Khanate cavalry led by Alateng. After the defeat, Harsan Khan had killed his way out of the encirclement under the protection of his personal guards. Following that, he gathered the remaining soldiers and gathered about 10,000 people. After that, he met the 20,000 Kazakh cavalry who were coming to support him. Thus, he mixed them into one army and retreated to Tabuli Tuqing. At the same time, he reorganized his army and looked for an opportunity to fight again. Harsan Khan did not admit defeat because he did not know what had happened on the other battlefields. He only thought that it was his own army that had lost. Then he still had 200,000 cavalry at his disposal. Moreover, as long as he could hold on, the other Khanates might continue to send reinforcements. Harsan Khan was not discouraged as there was still hope to turn defeat into victory. Gathering the 20,000 Kazakh cavalry was the first step. The 30,000 cavalry under the leadership of Harsan Khan turned around and headed towards Tabuli Tuqing. At this time, no one would have thought that their base was no longer under their control and had become a graveyard. After knowing the exact number of enemies, Tianhu knew that it was not realistic to want to destroy them in the city. Once the enemy found out that the commander guarding the city had changed, he was afraid that the first thing they would do was to escape. Thus he had waited for 6 days in vain. This result was unacceptable to Tianhu. Chapter 1503. Since they couldn't destroy them in the city, they would just go out and destroy them. Destroying the enemy in the wilderness was the specialty of the world's #1 cavalry army. Just like that, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th divisions received their respective missions. Tianhu left the most boring task of defending the city to the 5,000 men under his direct command, the reinforced regiment, which was under his command. After being angry for the past few days, they needed to vent their anger. Tianhu called the 4 division commanders over and said in front of them, "I've given you a chance. If you can't stop these 30,000 enemies, then you don't need to stay in the position of division commanders and become a joke to others. No matter what method he used, Tianhu was able to raise the morale of the 4 division commanders. When Harsenhan led his army to the city gates and saw the tightly shut gates, he angrily cursed. The flags of the Ilkhanate that were originally placed on top of the city gates were all pulled out and thrown onto the city walls. Instead, they were replaced with bright-colored flags of the 5 stars. Tianhu also officially appeared on the city walls and ordered the soldiers below to use their bows and arrows to shoot down from above. The arrows fell like rain and landed in the Mongolian army's camp, causing waves of mournful cries. Tianhu took the initiative to attack, which was equivalent to giving the order to attack. Outside the city, the 4 cavalry divisions that had been lying in ambush, a total of 40,000 men, suddenly appeared. They locked down all the escape routes of the Mongol army and charged in from the outside, reaping the lives of the Mongol cavalry. The world's #1 cavalry army's warriors, who had been fighting with all their might, finally had a chance to vent their anger. At this time, they all wanted to bring out all their skills and use all their strength to wave their arms. Therefore, they could only use 90% of their strength, not 80%. The First Army's cavalry was so fierce, and with the sudden attack, they quickly broke through the 3 defense lines that Harsenhan had set up. Seeing that the 4th defense line was about to be broken, Harsenhan's face became incomparably pale. He did not know why his own constabulary had been captured. He did not know at all. He also did not know why these 5-star troops appeared here. All he could do now was to reprimand General Dexy, and reprimand him and the Kazakh cavalry for their incompetence. In his view, there were 20,000 Kazakh cavalry, and with his 10,000 troops, there were 30,000 people. The Han army only had 40,000 people, which was 10,000 more than them. Even if they couldn't win, they shouldn't have lost so miserably. It was impossible that they didn't even have a chance to break out. He completely treated General Dexy as his subordinate and scolded him. Even Alateng couldn't stand it, not to mention General Dexy himself. No matter what, he is still a general of the Kazakh Khanate and not a subordinate of Harsan Khan. Even if you have something to discuss, you should discuss it with him and not scold him like a dog. After being scolded, the anger in Dexy's heart was getting bigger and bigger. This time, when he came to the battlefield, he didn't have any opportunity to show off. He encountered Harsan Han and was brought here. Then he was inexplicably attacked. If it was anyone else, they would have already been incomparably depressed. This scolding made his heart even angrier, but he didn't have a suitable opportunity to vent. Enough, I am a general of the Kazakh Khaganate, not your Ilkhanate's general. At this moment, Dexy wanted to shout out his thoughts. But he didn't dare to do so. Among the Khaganates, Kazakh was the first to fight with the 5-star army. Because their geographical location was very close to the Ili region, they had invested a large number of troops early on. As a result, their losses were very serious. For example, Janelbek Khan's younger brother, Keliai, was captured by the 5-star army. Many of the country's generals were killed, and a second-rate general like Keliai was now in charge of military power. Dexy had some ability, otherwise he wouldn't be in charge of 20,000 soldiers. But his personality was too weak and he was a bit timid. Because of this, his career had never been smooth. This time he came to support the Ilkhanate because there were no generals in the Khaganate, which gave him the opportunity. If it was anyone else who was scolded like this by Harsenhan, they would have been furious and refuted. But Dexy didn't have such courage, and this naturally had a lot to do with his personality. But this didn't mean that he wasn't angry. When he left the Great Khan's tent and returned to his own tent, the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. When he heard how brave the 5-star army was and how it was only a matter of time, he couldn't see the slightest future. It was also at this time that the guard captain Wanyan Hong proposed to him to surrender the 5-star army. This was because he understood Dexy. He knew that this person's personality was weak, and that he was indecisive when doing things. If it was any other general, the guard captain wouldn't dare to be so direct. And after he said this, Dexy didn't have any intention of blaming him. On the contrary, he was quite hesitant. "General, we can't wait any longer. The battle during the day was all because of the terrain. There wasn't enough open space, so the 5-star army couldn't display their abilities in a large-scale battle. This is why we were able to hold on for the day. Once we wait until tomorrow and face another fierce attack, I'm afraid we really won't be able to hold on." Guard Captain Wanyan Hong saw that Dexy didn't say anything and didn't make a decision, so he helped him analyze the situation of the battlefield. Being pressed hard by Wanyan Hong, Dexy replied, But will the five-star army accept our surrender? If they treat us like normal captives, then what's the point of surrendering and living a life worse than death? Seeing that Dexy was wavering, Wang Yanhong hurriedly said, General, there's no good way out if we surrender like this, but at least we can keep our lives, right? The current situation is that the five-star army is too strong. This lowly one will say something disappointing. This time, not only will the Ilkhanate be finished, even our Kazakh Khanate won't be any better. If things go wrong, our Khanate will be destroyed. Right now, we won't get any benefits from selling our lives to those people. This can't be. Dexy raised his head, his face filled with fear and uneasiness. How can it not be? Think about how strong the Golden Horde is, but in front of the five-star army won't it still be destroyed? Although our Khanates don't look weak, we're all fighting for ourselves. Under these conditions, how can we be a match for the five-star army? Today the Ilkhanate will be destroyed. Next time it might be someone else. Actually, we can be considered lucky. Wang Yanhong sighed. Lucky? What do you mean? This made Dexy a bit confused. General, think about it. We were the first batch to come into contact with the five-star army. If we surrender now, we'll have more chances to gain merits. This lowly one heard that in the five-star army, there are many soldiers and generals from the Golden Horde. Some generals even lead large armies. It must be because the five-star army is developing too quickly and there aren't enough generals. But speaking of which, isn't this an opportunity for people like you? As long as you seize the opportunity, you can completely transform into a general of the five-star army. That would be the best-case scenario. Becoming a general of the five-star army, is that possible? Dexy shook his head, his face filled with disbelief. What's impossible about it? Even if it's impossible, so what? Even the Khan's younger brother, Kalii, has been captured. Even if we surrender, it won't be a shameful matter. Not to mention, there's an opportunity to make a contribution right in front of us. As long as we can grab hold of it, who can say what the outcome will be? Wang Yanhong looked at Dixi with a hopeful expression. What opportunity to gain merits? Dexy clearly thought of something, but he still wanted to get confirmation from Wang Yanhong. It was because he understood his general too well that Wang Yanhong didn't hesitate to whisper, Capture Harsan Khan. This is the opportunity for you to gain merits. No, the other party is the Khan of a Khanate. We can't do that. Dexy quickly shook his head and refused. He was used to being a subject. Now that he was suddenly asked to capture the Khan, it was no wonder he had such a big reaction. Wang Yanhong anxiously sighed in his heart. He knew that persuading him wouldn't lead to any good results, so he simply closed his mouth and walked out of the tent. When Wang Yanhong walked out of the tent, the few Kiliarchs waiting outside walked up and asked with a hopeful expression, Captain Wang Yan, how is the situation? These people were either afraid of the five-star army's strength and didn't want to die, or they saw the situation clearly and knew that they couldn't win even if they continued fighting. There were also people who wanted to change sides. In the face of no hope, they wanted to make their own choice and live a different life. In short, these people were all generals who wanted to surrender to the five-star army. There were a total of 7 of them. In this army of 20,000 people, they were quite a force to be reckoned with. Seeing these people's eyes filled with hope and fighting spirit, Wang Yanhong opened his mouth and said, The general is still hesitating. He hasn't made a final decision yet. How can we do that? It's dark now, so the five-star army won't attack. However, when the sun rises, they won't wait any longer. Right now, the soldiers in the army are scared to death. They are all frightened by the strength of the five-star army. If this continues, we won't be able to hold them off tomorrow. Are we all going to die here? Yes. We don't want to die yet. We must convince the general. Chapter 1504. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Yes, we have to convince the general. Listen to my instructions. Wang Yanhong nodded. How could he not see that the army had lost their will to fight and morale? How could they win a battle with such an army? Right now, the only option left for them was to surrender. Since Dixi couldn't understand, they would force him to make a decision. Wang Yanhong's eyes flashed with determination. He had been by the general's side for so many years and he knew what he had to do to convince him. Under Wang Yanhong's leadership, the generals quickly gathered together to discuss a plan. In less than an hour, Wang Yanhong returned to the tent. After all, as the captain of the personal guards, his duty was to protect the general. When Wang Yanhong entered the tent, he saw a scene that made him exasperated. This was because Dishi was already sound asleep and was even snoring. It was really unimaginable that the general could still sleep when the war was so tense. One had to admit that he had a big heart. This also proved that the general didn't have any intention of rebelling. It was also because of this that Wang Yanhong was firm in his decision. He turned and walked out of the tent. He nodded to the few Kiliarchs who were waiting outside. In half an hour we will act according to plan. Wang Yanhong's plan was to try his best to convince Dishi. If it really didn't work, then the only way was to mutiny. For the sake of his brothers and himself, he was willing to be the bad guy. After Wang Yanhong said this, he turned and went back into the tent. He laid down on the fur mat in the corner of the tent. That was originally a place for him to rest. Not long after he lay down, there was a sudden shout from outside the tent. The noise was not small, and it woke up Dishi, who was sleeping. What's going on? What's going on? Don't tell me the 5-star army is attacking overnight? Hearing Dishi's anxious shout, Wang Yanhong pretended to have just woken up and rubbed his eyes. He asked, "Who's making a racket outside?" Just following this voice, several figures walked into the tent. Upon closer inspection, they were none other than the Kiliarchs who had been waiting outside for news. All of a sudden these people squeezed into the tent, making it seem a little crowded. Dishi was also shocked by these figures. He instinctively reached for the scimitar beside the bed. Fortunately, Wang Yanhong stood out and blocked Dishi. He then looked at these Kiliarchs with a questioning expression and shouted, "What are you doing?" "Captain Wang Yan, don't panic. We are here to report the military situation." The leading Kiliarch knelt on the ground with a thud and said in a tearful voice, "Reporting to General, this lowly one has just spent a lot of money to obtain information from Ili Khan's army. Harsan Khan has already ordered us to take the lead and launch a counterattack against the 5-star army tomorrow morning, and then kill a way out for them. General, there is no need to mention the strength of the 5-star army. What is the difference between doing this and committing suicide? Harsan Khan is not our Kazakh great Khan. There is no need for us to make such sacrifices for him." "That's right. They don't even see us as humans. There is no need for us to work for them. General, please give the order. We will break out of the encirclement tonight. Even if we die, we will not serve Harsan Khan." The generals below all spoke one after another, expressing their strong dissatisfaction with Ili Khan Harsan Khan. When Dishi heard all of this, his face turned even redder. At this time, he had no time to distinguish whether this news was true or false. He thought of how Harsan Khan had cursed him during the day. He was already angry to begin with. He really wanted to ignore Harsan Khan and lead his troops to kill their way out. At that time it would be lucky if they could charge out, but if they couldn't, then it would be his fate to die on the battlefield. However, his hesitant personality came into play at this time. Dishi still hesitated. He didn't want his soldiers to be wronged, but he also didn't want to become enemies with Harsan Khan. Therefore he didn't know what to do. Looking at this time, Dishi still didn't make a final decision. Wang Yanhong, who was at the side, decided to press on and force him to make a decision. He stepped forward and said, "General, I can understand your feelings. As a subject, as a general, we should listen to the orders of the monarch. But the problem is that we are not people of the Ili Khanate. If the 5-star army didn't appear, then our 2 Khanates would have fought at any time. Is it worth it for us to protect such a person with our lives? Moreover, whether or not we can protect Harsan Khan's life is another matter. However, we brothers will definitely die here. Please take into account that we have all followed the general for so many years and give us a way out." A way out? Dishi once again remembered what Wang Yanhong had said to him. At that time, because of his many years of subordinate mentality, when he heard that he would do something unfavorable to the great Khan, he didn't even think about it and refused. If he really did that, then he would be a traitor to the entire Khanate alliance and would be punished by everyone. He quickly shook his head and said, No, although Harsan Khan isn't our great Khan, he is one of the great Khans recognized by the Khanate alliance. As subjects, we can't have such thoughts. Generals, please don't say any more. Tomorrow morning, I will find Harsan Khan and make him give up on the idea of sending troops to take the lead." Dishi's words were completely self-deceiving. With his personality, how could he argue in front of Harsan Khan? Obviously he couldn't. This was just his words of comfort. It was because he didn't have the courage to make a choice and didn't have the courage to say no to his superiors that he had to lie to these Kiliarchs. This was a matter of the inheritance and education of the Khanate. In order for their rule to be passed down for 10,000 years or even longer, these great Khans had instilled in their generals, soldiers, and people the idea of loyalty to the great Khan. They let them know that the Great Khan was the chosen one and they could decide all life and death. On the other hand, no one was allowed to have any thoughts about the Great Khan. Otherwise, it would be going against the will of the heavens and everyone would have the right to punish them. It was this product of Dexy's education that made him want to protect the safety of the Great Khan even in the face of life and death. Even if the Great Khan was not from his own country, he was still very important in his eyes. Alright, everyone disperse first. Harsan Khan said that he has already reported this matter to the outside. Soon there will be reinforcements coming. As long as we can hold on until then, everyone will be fine. At that time, Harsan Khan will definitely reward us according to our contributions, haha. Dashi wasn't stupid and knew how to use this method to unite the people. He gave everyone hope and drew a beautiful blueprint in front of them. This way, not only could he stabilize the people's hearts, but when the battle broke out, everyone would be able to use their full strength. However, this kind of ordinary method was destined to fail today. Who didn't know that because of the sudden appearance of the 5-star army, they didn't have time to send people to ask for reinforcements. So where did this so-called reinforcements come from? They didn't know what happened here at all, okay? Seeing that Dashi still wanted to deceive them at this time, everyone's expression became unfriendly. Since this kind of persuasion didn't work, there was only one last method left. Thinking of this, everyone's gaze landed on the personal guard captain Wang Yanhong. Of course, Wang Yanhong knew what everyone wanted to do. To be honest, this was the last step. If there was any other method, he wouldn't want to do it. However, Dashi was so stubborn and didn't listen to anyone's advice. Thus, he could only resort to something like a mutiny. What are you all trying to do? No matter what, Dashi was still a commander of 20,000 people. When the atmosphere in the tent suddenly changed, he had a premonition that things weren't going well. His expression couldn't help but reveal a trace of panic. Sigh, General, why do you have to do this? Since you're thinking of going up and not giving us a way out, then you can't blame us. Wang Yanhong finally spoke. The moment he spoke, the 7 Kiliarchs in the tent rushed up like ferocious beasts and pressed Dashi, who had already touched the curved blade, to the ground. Previously, Wang Yanhong was blocking in front. Now that this personal guard captain wasn't there to help, Dashi instantly became a prisoner. No matter what, he was still a personal guard captain and was responsible for the general's safety. Wang Yanhong didn't have any intention of harming Dashi. He decided to hand this person over to the 5-star army to deal with. His current mission was to bring people to take down Harsan Han. Taking advantage of the fact that the other party didn't know what was going on and wasn't on guard, he quickly took him down. Only then could he appear before the 5-star army as a meritorious subject. At this moment, Harsan Han, who was 2 li away from the tent, didn't know about the mutiny below. At this moment, he had already entered the land of dreams and seemed to be having a bad dream. He had a conflicted expression on his face. It wasn't until Wang Yanhong brought people to place the curved blade on his neck that he woke up with a start. Who are you people? What do you want? When he woke up and saw a bunch of unfamiliar soldiers standing in front of him, Harsan Han instinctively wanted to shout. However, he immediately felt his vision turn black and was knocked out by a punch. The person who made the move was Wang Yanhong. He only knocked Harsan Han out because he didn't want to cause any more trouble. Now that the people who should be controlled were under control, he personally said to a Chiliarch beside him, "I'll leave the matters at home to you guys. I'm going to the 5-star army's main camp now." "Captain Wang Yan, are you going to go personally?" The Chiliarch was a little nervous. In his opinion, before he understood the 5-star army's attitude, there was no harm in sending someone else to communicate with them first. It was the best plan. "Yes, I'll go personally. If I send someone else, they won't be able to explain clearly." Wang Yanhong chuckled. Then he brought a healthy horse and galloped out of the main camp. Chapter 1505. At midnight, the 5-star army's camp was very quiet. Other than the soldiers on duty, the other soldiers and officers had already gone to bed early. There was still a tough battle waiting for them tomorrow. Without sufficient physical and mental strength, it would be impossible. However, in the main tent, Taimur and the other 3 division commanders were not sleeping. The 4 of them were glaring at each other, looking as though they had nowhere to vent their anger. The attack during the day wasn't very successful. Because the terrain was too narrow, the 5-star army's few charges were limited by the terrain. They couldn't unleash their full potential. Not only that, they had nowhere to hide under the rain of arrows. As a result, nearly 1,000 soldiers died. Although less than 300 of them died in the battle, most of them were injured. Moreover, they could still return to the camp after treatment. However, to the world's #1 cavalry army, this was still a big blow. 40,000 against 30,000. They had the advantage in numbers and even launched a surprise attack. However, they didn't win the battle and even lost many soldiers. No matter how one looked at it, this was a humiliation. It was a slap to the faces of the 4 division commanders. The 4 division commanders, who were always chatty when they gathered together, fell into silence for the first time. They didn't even inform Jianghu of this news. Otherwise, who knew what kind of thunderous roar they would face? Every division commander would have to bear a punishment first. This time, it could be said that the 4 division commanders had disgraced the invincible and undefeatable #1 cavalry army. What made the 4 division commanders even angrier was that tomorrow's attack wouldn't be too smooth. They knew that there was no way to retreat. If the enemy fought with their backs to the wall, even if they won in the end, they would have to pay a heavy price. They had the advantage in numbers but still had to pay a heavy price. This was something the 4 division commanders couldn't accept. Of course, it wasn't that there wasn't a better way. For example, they could surround the enemy and not attack. After a long time, the enemy would have to surrender when they ran out of food and water. However, how much time would that take? Seeing that all the armies and divisions were seizing every second to gain merits on the battlefield, they had no choice but to surround the less than 30,000 enemies and wait here. This was not something that a powerful army like the #1 cavalry army in the world should do. Sigh, if only we had the Cold Vanguard Division to cooperate with us, 2nd Division Commander Lu Duo couldn't help but say. Of course, everyone understood that with the Cold Vanguard Division present, with their firearms advantage, they would only need to fire at the Mongol army from time to time, and they would be able to beat them until they cried for their parents. It was not impossible for them to surrender without fighting. Alright, in the past, we didn't need the help of the Cold Vanguard Division. Now we can do the same. Let's think of a better way. The 5th Division's Division Commander Gong Feng spoke up. Speaking of which, among the 4 division commanders, he was the last to enter the 1st Cavalry Army. However, the other 3 division commanders did not dare to treat his words carelessly. Who didn't know that Gong Feng's teacher was Yang Qindong? With this relationship, he was someone who could reach the heavens. This was something that Taimu Lu Duo and Hu Bo could not compare to. After complaining, the 4 of them sat together to think of a solution. However, due to the narrow terrain, they really didn't have any good ideas. The greatest advantage of the 1st Cavalry Army was two. The first was their ferocious attacks. They were skilled in horsemanship and were good at using dual blades. Often they would be able to catch the enemy off guard and win from there. Secondly, they had the Big Dipper crossbow, which was a close combat killing weapon. This allowed them to win against many enemies despite being outnumbered. However, no matter which one it was, they needed to be in close combat with the enemy to be able to display their advantage. Once they were restricted by the terrain, their battle strength would be greatly reduced. This was also the reason why the 4 division commanders had such a headache. Sigh, if only the enemy would surrender. 1st Division Commander Taimu scratched his head and said with a silly look. His words also attracted the laughter of the other 3 teachers, which eased the originally oppressive atmosphere a little. However, everyone knew that it was impossible for the enemy to surrender. At least now was not the time for the enemy to see their true strength. Moreover, Harsenhan was still the great Khan of a country. How could he choose to surrender when he was not completely defeated? Unless it was a mutiny? Reporting. Just as the 4 division commanders were laughing and racking their brains to come up with a solution, the voice of the guard outside the door rang out. Reporting to the 4 division commanders. A person who claims to be Wanyan Hong broke into the camp and has been caught by our soldiers. However, he said that he wants to see the great general here. Broke into the camp? What do you mean? The 4 division commanders looked at each other. In the end, it was Gong Feng who made the decision. Bring him in. In a short while, Wanyan Hong, with his hands tied behind his back, walked into the tent under the watch of 2 5-star army soldiers. He saw the 4 division commanders sitting side by side. The moment he entered the tent, Wanyan Hong, who had been silent the entire time, immediately shouted, "What are you all doing? Is this the treatment for those who voluntarily surrender? If that's the case, then you can kill me." Wanyan Hong said preemptively. He wanted the teacher to snatch the person away. Only then would he be able to take the initiative in the following conversation. However, it was a pity that facing the 4 division commanders who had walked out of a mountain of blades and a sea of flames, their powerful auras still scared him, causing his body to tremble uncontrollably. All of this was clearly seen by the 4 division commanders. They knew that Wang Yanhong was trembling out of fear, but Gong Feng and the other 3 division commanders didn't take the initiative to expose him. This was because they were also very curious. What was Wang Yanhong doing here at this time? What did he mean by taking the initiative to surrender just now? Come, untie him and give him a seat. Gong Feng spoke on behalf of the 4 division commanders. The 2 guards weren't worried that Wang Yanhong would play any tricks. Which of the 4 division commanders in front of them wasn't a match for 100 or 1,000 men? Why would they worry about a surrendered general who didn't have a weapon? Immediately, the ropes were untied and a chair was placed in front of him. Even though he was still a bit scared, Wang Yanhong still forced himself to be calm and sat on the chair. Following that, his gaze swept across the faces of the 4 division commanders. The 2 guards had already retreated, leaving only 5 people in the large tent. In a situation where no one spoke, the atmosphere was a bit frighteningly quiet. This was especially true for Wang Yanhong. When he felt the pressure from the 4 division commanders who were filled with killing intent, it was impossible for him to pretend to be calm. Large amounts of sweat began to flow out from his forehead. Even though the weather at this time didn't exceed 10 degrees at night, Wang Yanhong still felt his body heat up and his heart was fluttering. Just when he felt that he couldn't withstand this aura anymore, Gong Feng spoke. It was as if a blazing sun shone on his body in the cold winter, causing him to feel warmth all over his body. You're called Wang Yanhong? Don't be nervous. What did you mean by surrendering? Oh, this little one is called Wang Yanhong. I'm the personal guard captain of General Dexy sent by the Kazakh Khanate. This time I came here to... Wang Yanhong repeated what he had wanted to say in his heart. At this time he still kept a secret. He only said that if he surrendered, would the 5-star army accept them and how they would be treated. He didn't say that he had already controlled General Dexy and Harsenhan from the Ilkhanate. Wang Yanhong wasn't sure if the 5-star army would accept his surrender. If they couldn't accept it, then he would just fight. His principle was that if someone didn't let him have an easy time, then he wouldn't let them have an easy time either. Wang Yanhong's tone was probing. When the other 3 division commanders heard this, they all revealed an impatient expression. They thought that Wang Yanhong was negotiating with them. How could the world's #1 cavalry army allow a defeated army to negotiate with them? On the other hand, Gong Feng gave the other 3 division commanders a look to calm them down. Then he laughed and said, Wang Yan, it should be a big surname. I wonder if General Wang Yanhong is related to it? It had to be said that this was the benefit of studying. Gong Feng was Yang Qindong's student, so he naturally knew a lot. When he asked this question, Wang Yanhong's body shook and he lowered his head. Looking at this scene, Gong Feng's intuition told him that Wang Yanhong should be related to the Wang Yan clan. He laughed and said, What? Is there something that you can't say? Oh no. Since the general has asked, there's no harm in telling you. Actually, my ancestor is the Wang Yan clan. We were defeated by the Kazakh Khanate and became their captives. Because my performance was good, General Dexy took a fancy to me and appointed me as the captain of the Kazakh Khanate. When Wang Yanhong spoke of this, he could clearly feel the heaviness in his heart. Although it was summarized in 2 simple sentences, he must have experienced a lot of things. Moreover, it should be very sad. When he heard this, Gong Feng's expression became better. His intuition told him that this should be a breakthrough that would greatly benefit their following work. Oh, so it's like this. It seems like we have more things to talk about with Brother Wang Yan. At least we have the same enemy, right? The same enemy? Wang Yanhong's face was filled with confusion. Yes, the Kazakh Khanate is our common enemy. If you are willing, we can help your Wang Yan clan take revenge. Gong Feng nodded solemnly and said, At that time, as long as we break through the Kazakh Khanate, we can save your suffering clansmen and return them their freedom. At that time, you, Wang Yanhong, will be the benefactor of the entire Wang Yan clan, hehe. Of course, if you want us to do this, you have to show some sincerity. For example, help us deal with the enemies in front of us. Chapter 1506. When Wang Yanhong heard that he would be the benefactor of the Wang Yan clan, he was stunned. He didn't even hear what Gong Feng said next. He only knew that the 5-star army was willing to return the freedom of the Wang Yan clan after destroying the Kazakh Khanate. This was what all the Wang Yan clan members wanted the most. Previously, he chose to betray General Kashi's order because he didn't want to die here. His Wang Yan clan was still in deep trouble. If he couldn't save them, he wouldn't be able to die in peace. Although this goal was far away and he might not be able to accomplish it even if he survived, at least he was still alive. He could work hard for this goal and there was still hope. He didn't expect that this hope would become reality so easily. How could Wang Yinhong not be excited? How could he not do his best for the 5-star army to attack the Kazakh Khanate? Brother Wang Yin, did you hear what I said? What do you think? Gong Feng looked at Wang Yinhong for a long time. Wang Yinhong didn't say anything. Instead, tears flowed from the corners of his eyes. Gong Feng couldn't help but urge him. Oh, I agree to all the requests of the 5-star army. As long as they can save our Wanyan clan members, I will do anything. Alright, I have already controlled General Kashi Harsenhan and the others. Now, we just need to wait for the 5-star army to come and take them. Alright, I also know of a small path that leads to the Kazakh Khanate's capital. It was a path that our Wanyan clan members often took. Other than us, no one else knows about it. After Gong Feng said that he could help the Wanyan clan, Wang Yinhong completely fell. He told them everything that he knew, and the 4 teachers were all very excited after listening to him. Just a moment ago, they were still having a headache about how to deal with the 30,000 enemies in front of them with the smallest price. Now, not only was this problem solved, the direction of their campaign was also pointed out. For a moment, the 4 division commanders couldn't help but laugh. Herat City. In the capital of the Timur Empire, Great Khan Amur was furiously cursing Harsan Khan's stupidity. At this time, Khan Amur still didn't know that Harsan Khan had already become a captive of the 5-star army and had been betrayed by his own people. All his attention was now focused on the crisis in front of him. Ever since he took over the position of Grand Khan of Timur from Abu Said Mirza, Amur had wholeheartedly wanted to strengthen the Timur Empire, and this was his lifelong goal. However, some goals were easier said than done. It had to be said that Amur had a clever side to him. In order to achieve this goal, he had intentionally pretended to be unambitious. He had even turned a blind eye to the conflicts between the other nearby Khaganates, giving others the impression that he was a man who ruled without doing anything and had no ambition. In fact, he just wanted to use this method to reap the benefits. Seeing these Khaganates fighting in a group, consuming their own strength, and once they were seriously injured, it would be time for him to open his bloody mouth and seize the fruits of victory. This was what he thought and did. Recuperating and building up strength was only for the sake of accumulating strength. When the 5-star army suddenly appeared, he was even more overjoyed. With such an enemy coming out to disturb the situation, it was impossible for those Khaganates who wanted to protect themselves to not send out their troops and expend their resources. At that time, as long as the 5-star army was driven away, he would be able to pacify the entire region and establish a powerful Khaganate. But he never expected that the 5-star army would win many battles with a thunderous momentum, bringing great pressure to the Khaganates. This kind of pressure made Amur feel that he couldn't bear it anymore. What he wanted was for the 5-star army to disturb the situation, not for the other party to be strong enough to destroy all the Khaganates. If that was the case, how could he achieve his goal? Gradually, Amur discovered that the 5-star army had become his #1 enemy. He had no choice but to change his strategy and began to unite more Khaganates to face this powerful enemy together. For this reason he felt pity for the 2 battlefields on the east and west. For this reason he sent 50,000 cavalry to each side of the battlefield. But even so, the situation on the battlefield was still not optimistic. They could only barely block the attacks of the 5-star army. Thus he placed all his hopes on Harsan Khan. He believed that in order to protect his Ilkhanate from being destroyed, he would definitely use as much strength as he could. This was why he allowed Harsan Khan to become the commander of the Western Front, leading 300,000 cavalry to fight against the 5-star army. Before the war, Amur still held a rather optimistic attitude. No matter what, they still had the home advantage. As long as they could fight a war of attrition with the 5-star army, after a long time, the other party would definitely retreat without reinforcements and logistical support. At that time, the other party would have failed once and it would be even more difficult for them to enter this territory again. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to carry out a second expedition in their lifetime. In that case, he would be able to carry out his plan of annexing the various Khanates and strengthening the Timur Empire. With 300,000 against 400,000, and with the defensive position and the advantage of being the host, the result of this war could be predicted. Just as Amur was looking at all this with optimism, bad news came one after another. First, the 5-star army fought 100,000 against 100,000, entangling his main force. Next, the 5-star army fought 30,000 against 100,000 and won, driving away Harsan Khan's troops, shocking many people. Then, the Norman Khaganate was destroyed by the five-star army through a sneak attack. This made Amor extremely shocked. He could not figure out how the five-star army did it. And now, an even more severe test was placed in front of him. The five-star army actually changed the direction of their advance and headed straight for his Timur Empire. As the most powerful existence among the Khaganates, the Timur Empire was located in the middle of all the Khaganates. This was their advantage. They could suddenly dispatch troops to attack any Khaganate at any time. But at the same time, it was also their disadvantage. They could dispatch troops to attack from any Khaganate. In the past, the Timur Empire was the dominant power. The other small Khaganates nearby only thought about how to curry favor with him. How could they think of attacking him? Therefore he was not worried. But now, with the appearance of the five-star army, they would not carry out their plan. When he heard that the five-star army had dispatched troops to the Timur Empire from the Ilkhanate and the Norman Khaganate, Amor was indeed frightened and angry. He was angry at the arrogance of the five-star army, but also worried about whether he could block the enemy's advance. Men, summon Great General Manjalatu. Amur, who was a little flustered, decided to do something. He couldn't continue to wait like this. Otherwise, not to mention that he wouldn't be able to realize his ambitions, whether he could establish a foothold in the world would become a very serious problem. Manjalatu was fully deserving of the title of Great General of the Timur Empire. This person was extremely capable. On the battlefield he was also known as the King of 100 Victories. It was rumored that when the nearby Khaganates heard his name, children would stop crying. From this, it could be seen how influential he was. After being summoned into the hall, Manjalatu strode in front of Amor. Without waiting for him to salute, Amor asked in a hurried tone, "Great General, you should be aware of the situation. Do you have any way to deal with the enemy?" "It's just a two-legged sheep. It's not a big deal." Manjalatu, who was not tall and had a face full of beard, smiled conceitedly with a look of indifference. For some reason, after seeing Manjalatu's performance, Amor, who was originally somewhat anxious, calmed down a lot. "Oh, but what is the Great General's arrangement?" "It's very simple. We'll just have to deal with whatever comes our way. The enemy is coming from afar. Their provisions will definitely be insufficient. We only need to fight a war of attrition with them. We can delay them until they have no choice but to retreat. Moreover, our Timur Empire has a lot of water plants, mountains and lakes. We can use this advantageous terrain to deal with them. In short, we don't need to fight a big battle. Our main goal is to harass them. As long as we can hold on for a while, the enemy will have no choice but to consider retreating." Amor nodded in satisfaction after hearing this. However, he felt that the other party had not finished speaking, so he asked tentatively, "But I wonder if there are any other methods?" "Of course there are, Great Khan. We can send people to contact Bangladesh and provide them with gold and silver. Let them send troops to harass the rear of the five-star army. When the rear is on fire, the five-star army will not be able to fight a war of attrition with us here. At that time we can divert the trouble and stabilize the situation." Manjalatu's face was full of confidence. Obviously he had already prepared for this. "Good, haha, this Khan has the Great General's help. It's just a two-legged sheep. What is there to fear? So, the 250,000 cavalrymen in the country will all be handed over to the Great General. This Khan will wait for the good news of the Great General's victory." Amor laughed and handed over the military power. Over the past few years, the Timur Empire had prepared a total of 350,000 cavalrymen, which was definitely a powerful force. Even when the Golden Horde was at its peak, the Timur Empire still couldn't compare to it. They still had to rely on the Sherkas people and the Alans to fight against the five-star army. Just from this aspect alone, the Timur Empire was clearly a bit more powerful. After handing over everything to Manjalatu, Amor waited for the final result. He was full of confidence in the Great General. At this time, Yang Qindong, who was rushing from the Ilkhanate to the Timur Empire, also learned about Manjalatu from the intelligence department. Chapter 1507. There was quite a bit of information that was sent over, all of it showing how troublesome and terrifying this person was. Even Yang Qindong felt that this person was a bit troublesome. He had a feeling that this person's existence would greatly hinder his great plan of unifying the Timur Empire. "Inform Chushi to come down and meet me." After Yang Qindong threw down these words to Badeo Jiang, who was accompanying him, he continued to look through all of the information related to the Timur Empire in his hands. He was considering a suitable path of advance. Right now, it wasn't only their army that was rushing towards the Timur Empire. Apart from the 4 divisions of the world's #1 cavalry army, as well as the Russian division, all of the other 5-star army, totaling over 300,000, were converging here from all directions. There was no need to talk about the world's #1 cavalry army. They had already taken down the capital of the Ilkhanate, Buli-Tuching, and were preparing to take a small path to the rear of the Kazakh Khanate. They were going straight for the capital, striving to open up a path there. This way they would be able to meet up with the 5-star army in the east. Once this matter was accomplished, it would be the same as opening up an important path for supplies. This would play a decisive role in prolonging the army's ability to fight. Even Yang Qindong didn't think that Tianhu's #1 cavalry army would do this. When he received the telegram, he was excited for quite a while. Ahuli's Russian division was currently clearing out the remnants of the Allied forces in the Ilkhanate. After several battles, the Allied forces could be said to have suffered successive defeats. The original 300,000 Allied forces were now reduced to less than 60,000. Ahuli, this valiant general, took responsibility for this matter. It had to be said that he was worthy of being someone who had once been a great Khan. He really did have a way of leading troops. According to the telegram, Ahuli had already fought against the Allied forces of the Ilkhanate 8 times, and suffered defeat once. Apart from these 2 armies, Yang Qindong had mobilized all of the forces he could currently mobilize. From this, it could be seen how much importance he attached to the Timur Empire. It could also be said that once the Timur Empire was taken down, the so-called Khanate alliance would be disbanded. What followed would be encirclement and suppression. This also meant that the Yangtze's territory had expanded by at least a third. And in order to achieve this goal, they had to get rid of the Timur Empire first. And if they wanted to destroy the Timur Empire, they had to get rid of Mandu Latu, who was a difficult general to deal with. Otherwise, if the army was really exhausted here and the provisions couldn't be transported up in time, once summer passed and winter came, they would only have one path left, which was to retreat. This also meant that all their previous efforts would be ruined in an instant. This was not something Yang Qindong could accept. In order to prevent things from developing in this direction, he had to attack fiercely and try to take down the Timur Empire in the shortest time possible. The Timur Empire's environment and landscape were very complicated. There were many deserts, and there were very few places that were suitable for cavalry to fight. It was completely different from the time when they were dealing with the Golden Horde, where both sides appeared in a decisive battle. That was how they achieved victory in the shortest time possible. Shaking his head, he carefully looked at the map and some information, but he could not find a place or opportunity for the decisive battle. Yang Qindong could not help but sigh. It seems that we can only push forward slowly. I hope that Tianhu and the others can succeed and join forces with the East Army to solve the urgent need for provisions. In the 15th century, most of the land of the Kazakh Khanate was separated from the Golden Horde and became part of the Yuebi Khanate. Later, some tribes broke away from the Yuebi Khanate's rule and were called escapees, or escapees, and gradually formed the Kazakh people. The Kazakh Khanate's territory was inhabited by nomadic Turkic people. It was because of this that they were a people that could fight and were also a people that liked to fight. The capital, Akamo, was also built more than a decade ago. Although it was called a city, it was actually just a slightly larger market. There were some walls made of earth around the city. They were not high, only about 1 zhang high. In the end, it was just for show. Because if a war really broke out, they did not expect to rely on these walls to defend anything. At that time, they would rush out on horseback with all of their belongings. This also allowed them to move faster. Unless they were completely surrounded, it would be very difficult to eliminate them. It was because of this that the 5-star army on the East Front could not find the main force to engage in a decisive battle. More often than not, when they received the news, they would rush over empty-handed. In the end, they could only move forward bit by bit and were unable to join forces with Yang Qindong on the West Front. Relying on this kind of fast-moving method, the Kazakh Khanate's Jainurbek Khan was not afraid of the 5-star army's attack. As long as he received the news, he would immediately leave. When the other side missed, he would consider cutting off the 5-star army's supply line, thus forcing the other side to retreat and give up the territory that they had just occupied. This kind of strategy gave the 5-star army an endless headache. Before they could eliminate the other side's strength, it was impossible for them to occupy those so-called earth walls. This was because unless they were heavily guarded, they would face the other side's counterattack at any time. Thus, there was the possibility of being swallowed up. This was the biggest problem in dealing with the Kazakh Khanate. The five-star army had outstanding bravery and elite cavalry, but they were still unable to deal with the other side. And all of this would change with the appearance of the 1st Cavalry Division led by Jianghu. With Wang Yinhong's help, the more than 40,000 brave warriors of the 1st Heavenly Cavalry Army set out from the Ilkhanate's capital, Tabuli Tuching, making a detour around the Timur Empire's territory, quietly cutting into the Kazakh Khanate's rear. Wang Yinhong was worthy of being a descendant of the Wanyan clan. He was extremely familiar with the situation in this area. The path that he pointed out was indeed unknown. Along the way they didn't encounter any traces of enemies. According to what he said, they would be able to enter the Kazakh Khanate's territory in at most half a month. Then they would be able to reach Akimo City in 10 days. Then they would be able to secretly deal a fierce blow to Janibek Khan and eliminate as much of the other side's strength as possible. The next 25 days would be the most crucial period. Their tracks absolutely couldn't be discovered. For this reason, Tianhu took the initiative to send a telegram to Yang Qindong, requesting the 6th young master's help and cooperation. This was because apart from being discovered by the Kazakh cavalry, Tianhu was also worried that they would be discovered by the Timur Empire's cavalry. After all, that Mandaratl wasn't a good person. Once he discovered their tracks, he feared that the entire 1st Cavalry Division would face the grim situation of being surrounded from all sides. After receiving Tianhu's telegram, Yang Qindong ordered the army to attack from all sides in order to divert Mandaratl's attention. At the same time, all of the Air Force's hot air balloons were deployed as guides. In other words, once the hot air balloons discovered the target, they could also drop explosive packs from the air before the 5-star Army's cavalry arrived. In short, they couldn't let the Timur Empire's soldiers be idle. They had to create a feeling of war everywhere. This way they wouldn't have the time to care about anything else. This would create an even more favorable situation for the 1st Cavalry Division to advance. The 5-star Army launched a frenzied attack. Almost every day there would be large and small-scale battles. Under Mandaratl's command, the 250,000 Timur Empire's cavalry also launched multiple attacks. Using their understanding of the environment, they started a game of hide-and-seek with the 5-star army. They were very skilled in using Sun Tzu's art of wars. When the enemy advances, I will retreat. When the enemy retreats, I will disturb them. Just like that, half a month passed. The 5-star army launched many attacks, but the results were few and far between. The army was also exhausted. Yang Qindong finally received a telegram from Tianhu. They had successfully passed through the Timur Empire and entered the Kazakh region. He ordered the army to retreat and find a safe place to rest and reorganize. After entering the Timur Empire, the 5-star army's first attack ended. When the news of them stopping the attack reached the capital, Ahmet Khanamur's face was beaming with joy. His frowning face for the past few months was swept away and he cheered a few times. On the same night, the entire capital fell into a carnival. Especially Great General Mandaratl, everyone killed sheep, ate meat, drank wine and played all night. In contrast, the atmosphere in the 5-star army's camps was somewhat gloomy. After attacking for half a month, the number of enemies destroyed was not even 10,000 cavalry. Moreover, the other side was already prepared. They had scorched the walls and cleared the field, so there was no harvest in terms of food. This was naturally rare for the 5-star army. In the past, as long as they decided to attack, they would definitely gain a lot. This time it was the 6th young master who personally gave the order, but they still got such a result. Many people couldn't accept it. In the end, they could only comfort themselves with the excuse that even immortals would take a nap, and the 6th young master wouldn't be too difficult. Beta Persei had already returned to Yang Qindong's side with the Black Cavalry. In the past half a month he had been tormenting himself a lot, but unfortunately he couldn't touch the enemy's main force at all. When he finally found the enemy's figure, the enemy would drill into the mountains, making it impossible for him to chase after them. Beta Persei didn't like this kind of fighting method where he couldn't find an opponent at all. In the end he had no choice but to return to Yang Qindong's side. As soon as he returned, he heard the voices of the soldiers below. There were actually people who dared to doubt the young master. This was something that Beta Persei couldn't tolerate. He secretly called Qiu Vi Dao Shao Ba Dao Jiang and the other leaders of the Black Cavalry, and asked them to find those who were suspicious. He wanted to teach a few of them a lesson and punish them according to the law. But for some reason Yang Qindong found out about this matter. He called the Black Cavalry and stopped them in public. Their mouths are on other people's bodies. We can't interfere with what they think. As long as it doesn't affect the morale of the army, we don't need to care. At least, whether they are right or not depends on the final result. Don't worry. Chapter 1508. Yang Qindong said these words so confidently, but when they fell into the ears of Beta Persei and the others, they had no choice but to suppress the anger in their hearts. But at the same time this confidence infected them. The matter of Jianghu entering the Kazakh Khanate is top secret. In order to prevent it from being leaked, Yang Qindong didn't even tell Beta Persei about it. It's not that he doesn't trust them, but he's worried that after telling them, these people will talk about it in a moment of happiness. If this news gets out, it will be bad. Since it's easy to cause all kinds of problems, it's better not to say it. It just so happens that he also took this opportunity to see what kind of performance the other senior generals in the army will have. If someone is full of complaints because of a moment of dissatisfaction, or even has other ideas, it's tantamount to a pleasant surprise, and he can get rid of such a black sheep. For this reason, a total of 120 intelligence personnel were secretly sent to the various armies and began to investigate the reaction of all sides. Time passed day by day like this. 4 days later, outside the general's mansion in Herat City, Chuishij came with 2 jonins to collect some things. Before the war began, they were sent here to carry out the decapitation operation and get rid of the great enemy Mandaratu. But from the moment he received this task, Chuishij knew that this task is not easy to complete, or even impossible to complete. However, even though he knew this, he still had to come because this was Yang Qindong's intention. No matter what kind of thoughts this Han held, since he had spoken, he had to carry it out. Just like Yang Qindong never believes in aliens, Chuishij also doesn't completely believe in Yang Qindong. Although all the training costs are now paid by Yang Qindong, in fact the two sides are more of a cooperative relationship. After all, ninjas have been taught for hundreds of years. In their bones, the Japanese Empire is their home, their root. Now they have to live for the people who once destroyed their roots, which is a bit unacceptable from a psychological point of view. On this point, not only was Chushi aware of it, he believed that the other 2 special ninja brothers, Kitamura and Yui Suzuki, were also aware of it. The 3 of them had made a lot of preparations for this. For example, they had secretly accumulated money and made all sorts of preparations to leave the 5-star army. It had to be said that in some aspects Yang Qindong was very generous. In order to make the ninjas work for him, any materials they request every month will be fully satisfied. Every time he was able to save 20%, it was not a small fortune. Over time he had accumulated quite a lot over the past few years. Just as he was about to become independent, Blowing Stone received the order to be transferred to the front lines. Because he wasn't fully prepared, Blowing Stone had to say goodbye to his 2 brothers and come here. The last time he was ordered to protect Yang Qindong, Blowing Stone wanted to see if he could use Ivan to kill Yang Qindong. Unfortunately, Ivan was an impulsive young man, he wasn't fully prepared. Blowing Stone thought that even if he wanted to go easy on Yang Qindong, he wouldn't be able to hurt Yang Qindong. This is because they know that in terms of individual combat power, King Wunan of Damyang is even more abnormal. Although they have never seen him in action, they heard that even the strongest black cavalry can't be his opponent. This can be seen from Yang Qindong's disappearance and the defeat of Yeshin's 30,000 Walla army. This person clearly has a backup plan, in other words he doesn't fully trust him. Thinking about how he almost believed that this was a good opportunity to make a move, Blowing Stone couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Of course, Blowing Stone didn't know that the reason why Yeshen lost was because he lost to Daikara, not because Yang Qindong was prepared. Not knowing the truth, Blowing Stone thought that he didn't have Yang Qindong's trust at all. Because of this, he also had other thoughts about this mission. In his opinion, this was the method of that person driving the wolf to devour the tiger. To put it bluntly, if the assassination was successful, it would be best. It would help him complete the mission, but if Mandula too really died as the murderer, it would be difficult for Blowing Stone to escape Herat. In the end he couldn't avoid death. On the other hand, if the assassination didn't succeed, it would be difficult for him to escape. In the end he would still die. If that was the case, Yang Qindong wouldn't be sad because in that person's eyes, he was someone who couldn't be trusted. If he died, then he died. Therefore this mission was basically a dilemma. If he made a move he would die, but if he didn't he would be disobeying orders. Death was the only option, and this feeling made Blowing Stone very uncomfortable. He couldn't help but think of that person, the person who secretly contacted them. Maybe he should consider cooperating with that person, at least the result can't be worse, right? If their leader wasn't Yang Qindong, then Blowing Stone wouldn't have so much pressure. Others can't control his own fate. Thinking of the words that the man had hinted at, Blowing Stone had an idea. At this time they just walked around the general's mansion and Blowing Stone finally said, "The situation is clear, is there any problem if we do it tonight?" "No problem." The two behind him replied softly. "Very good." When Blowing Stone said this sentence, there was a trace of unbearable expression on his face. Once the fight starts, these two ninjas who have followed him for many years won't live past tonight. But even if he knows this, he can't say anything. Just like how Yang Qindong doesn't easily trust others, he also doesn't dare to trust the ninjas under him. Who knows if they have been bribed by Yang Qindong all this time? Ninjas often choose a dark and windy night to make a move, which is more conducive to their actions. Tonight is a good night because of the clouds, there is no moonlight. And this is a good opportunity for the ninjas to show their strength. In the general's mansion, Mandu Latu was standing in front of the map in his study. Others are immersed in the great joy of defeating the 5-star army at the moment, but as the commander of the army, he didn't get carried away by the victory. Speaking of which, in this half-a-month's battle, the Timur cavalry did not gain any advantage. Instead, they lost more than 8,000 cavalry. On the contrary, according to the information they received, they only killed less than 1,000 soldiers of the 5th Astral Corps. This is a complete defeat. It was only because the 5-star army had become a scourge in everyone's eyes. Therefore, in many people's eyes, if they could stall the 5-star army until they couldn't win, it would be their victory. That was why there was this celebration. This battle made Mandu Latu more aware of the strength and sharpness of the 5-star army. But at the same time, it also made him feel that something is wrong. He had studied the past of the 5-star army before. This was an army that always had a clear goal when they attacked. Why would they fight randomly this time? The battle that had lasted for half a month seemed to be completely random. Even if it was him, he wouldn't command such a chaotic battle. At least, they would try to test it. For example, if a lone army went deep into the capital to see if there's an opportunity to take the head of a general and so on. But the 5-star army didn't do this at all, they just kept attacking, retreating, and advancing. This made Mandu Latu very puzzled, and he began to reflect on whether he missed something. Or the reason why the 5-star army did this is to hide something. But what are they trying to hide? This is the so-called abnormal thing, there must be a demon. The 5-star army doesn't play by the rules, this is what Mandu Latu can't figure out. And if he can't figure out the situation of the other side, then it's not impossible for him to suffer a loss, or even die. Standing in front of the map, Mandu Latu didn't move for a long time, he was still thinking about any possibilities. He didn't believe that the commander of the Ross Principality who defeated the Golden Horde would make such a stupid move and attack without a goal. Often, the more aimless the attack, the more likely it is that he is carrying out a secret plan. But what is this plan? On the map, Manjilatul slowly moved. Unconsciously, he looked at the Kazakh Khanate to the northwest of the Timur Empire. He seemed to have thought of something. His hand involuntarily moved towards that direction on the map. Assassins, protect the general. It was at this moment that a sudden voice broke Manjilatul's train of thought, causing his original inspiration to disappear completely. It was completely disrupted by the shouts outside the door, and it disappeared without a trace. Outside the door, the ninjas finally made their move. But just like what Yushi had imagined before, as an existence second only to Great Khan Amur in the Timur Empire, Mandu Latu's safety was naturally the top priority, so how could he be easily assassinated? The 50 ninjas just arrived at the inner courtyard, but they were discovered by the guards in charge of the general's safety. In a short period of time, the entire inner courtyard was brightly lit. In such an environment, it was no different from daytime. Without the darkness that the ninjas relied on, they were like tigers with their teeth pulled out. They lacked a deadly weapon to deal with the enemy. The 50 ninjas were surrounded in all corners, but none of them were waiting for death. This may have something to do with the education they have been receiving. Even if they die, they will die on the way and they will not choose to surrender. Without the cover of darkness, the ability shown by these ninjas is equivalent to ordinary elite soldiers. Under the siege of more and more Mongolian soldiers, one ninja after another died tragically in the inner courtyard. Some ninjas even closed their eyes after being stabbed several times. Chapter 1509. In a small courtyard on a street not far from the general's mansion, A black shadow wearing a black suit was sitting there with his eyes closed. He was one of the special ninjas of the Wu province. Just a moment ago, he had led 50 ninjas to sneak out of the great general's mansion. But unknowingly he had retreated. Yes, he had betrayed his ninjas in order to save his own life. And all of this was not because he was afraid of death, but because he had a greater goal to achieve, such as the independence of the ninjas. In order to achieve this goal, he did not hesitate to sacrifice the lives of these 50 ninjas. And from this moment on, he would temporarily disappear from everyone's sight. He would look for that person, the person who had given them the hint. Perhaps that person was the only hope for them to escape from the great general's control and regain their freedom. In the great general's mansion, the assassination was over after half an hour. All of the ninjas were killed, and the Mongolian army had paid a price of 130 people. From this, it could be seen that the individual combat strength of a ninja was still very strong. Even if they were surrounded, even if they could not show their best side, they still managed to injure their opponents. Mangelata was inspecting the corpses on the ground under the close protection of his personal guards. After the experienced people confirmed that these were the legendary ninjas of the Japanese Empire, there was not a trace of fear on Mangelata's face. Instead, he laughed as if he had survived a disaster. He finally figured out why the 5-star army had done so much useless work for half a month. It turned out that this was their purpose. It was to make him relax his vigilance and create an opportunity for these ninjas. Fortunately, he had always been careful and cautious, so he was spared. As if he had finally figured out the matter, Mangelata's face was full of a sense of relief. He wanted to see what tricks the 5-star army had up their sleeves. At the same time, he wanted to hang the corpses of these assassins on the city wall. He wanted to let everyone know that the Han people had tried to assassinate him. He wanted everyone to know that he, Mangelatu, was not afraid of being beaten, and he could not be killed. The personal guards moved quickly. In just the morning, the corpses of the 50 ninjas were hung on the city wall for all the Mongolians to see. Among them were members of Yang Xie's intelligence department. They quickly sent the news back by telegram and asked for instructions on what to do next. Yang Qindong was not surprised when he heard the news. If Mangelatu could be killed so easily, then he wouldn't be worthy of being the 5-star army's opponent. Let them investigate. Check all the deceased and record their appearances and specific numbers. They are all heroes. If they have family members, they should be compensated generously. This matter seemed to have passed just like that. In order to express his anger, Yang Qindong even intentionally sent out 5,000 cavalrymen to search for the main force of the Mongolian cavalrymen, intending to have a decisive battle. Unfortunately, even though Mangelatu was prepared, he still couldn't find anything. On the other hand, the 5-star army didn't dare to advance too far due to the lack of food. In the end, they had no choice but to retreat. Along the way from the Golden Horde, they had already used up 70% of the food they brought. With less than 30% left before new food arrived, it was impossible for the army to advance without a goal. Unless they could find the main force of the Mongol army and fight them, or they had new rations to replenish their supplies, the 5-star legion could only retreat from here and find a way out. The battlefield fell into a stalemate. Mangelatu looked at this scene silently. He even had a bold idea. Before winter came, if the 5-star army still held on and didn't retreat, he would launch a large-scale counterattack. He wanted to see what kind of fighting strength an army without food and soldiers without enough to eat could have. On the battlefield, the 5-star army's main force seemed to have fallen into a passive state. With the cooperation of Wanyan Hong, Tianhu finally brought the main force of the World Cavalry Army to the outskirts of the Kazakh capital, Akhmo. On a nearby hill, Tianhu used his binoculars and could already see the short earthen walls. He could also see many Mongolian citizens carrying out various transactions within the walls. This is the capital of Kazakh. Tianhu asked with a hint of doubt when he saw how simple and crude everything was. In fact, it wasn't even as good as a village in Crimson City. This was of course not a question but a sigh. Wanyan Hong saw this and didn't answer this question. Instead, he lowered his head in shame. Evidently, he also felt a bit embarrassed. After all, being poor wasn't something to be proud of. Alright, don't be sad. Believe me, once the people of your Wanyan clan become the people of our Yang family, their lives will certainly become better and better. There will be earth-shaking changes. At that time, your clansmen will thank you for generations. Hehe. Feeling the change in Wanyan Hong's mood, Tianhu patted the latter's shoulder to comfort him. Then he said to the 4 division commanders who came with him, "Have you all seen the terrain clearly? Remember it well. We will have a meeting when we go back. Tonight we will launch the attack. When he said this, Tianhu also felt a bit relieved. This operation is a bit risky. Now that I think about it, I only listened to Wang Yanhong's side of the story. If something goes wrong, I'm afraid that the entire number 1 cavalry army will suffer a heavy loss. It's not an exaggeration to say that the 4 divisions and I might even lose our lives here. Fortunately, Wang Yanhong didn't disappoint him. The matter was finally completed. The target was right in front of him, and he didn't show any signs of vigilance. This made Tianhu very confident about the next attack plan. After bringing the 4 division commanders back to the camp 12 miles away, Tianhu immediately ordered all the soldiers to take out all the food and finish it in one meal. This was to ensure that they had enough energy to complete the mission. In fact, even if they took out all the food, they would only be 70% full. After running continuously for such a long time, the World Cavalry Army's rations had already been depleted. This was the importance of logistics in a war. Since Yang Qindong established the 5-star army, he had never been so worried about food. In the past, when deciding where to send troops, he would always prepare enough rations in advance. In the process of battle, the rations would be continuously delivered through various channels. Even when they were fighting against the Golden Horde and the Ras Duchy, there were still millions of people working hard. Countless military provisions were sent from the Yang's provinces to the 3 eastern provinces, and then from there to the far eastern province. It seemed that Yang Qindong's war was like a hot knife through butter. But in reality, the credit of the logistics personnel couldn't be less. It was because of the logistics that the soldiers at the front lines could fight the enemy without worry. They didn't have to worry about not having food to eat, clothes to wear if they were cold, or medicine to use if they were injured. But when they entered the Ilkhanate from Eastern Europe, the 5-star army's pace was a little too big. Along the way, many places only surrendered and weren't destroyed. Naturally, they weren't considered Yangtze's territory. And it was because of the instability of their retreat that when the 5-star army's main force left, they quickly went back on their words and didn't recognize Yangtze as their sovereign state. At this time, it was impossible to transport rations from there. If they insisted on doing so, they were afraid that no matter how much they transported, they would be robbed. In the end, not a single grain of rice would fall into the hands of the 5-star army. And it was precisely because the rations were cut off that Mandula too confidently faced the 5-star army and played guerrilla warfare. The 5-star army couldn't find their main force and didn't know where the enemy's main cavalry was. They didn't dare to advance rashly. Otherwise, it would be easy for their retreat to be cut off and they would be surrounded one by one. The 5-star army was strong, and their combat power was incomparable to that of an ordinary army. They even had a pure firearms unit like the Cold Front. If they faced the enemy head-on, they wouldn't be afraid of any enemy. But if the enemy used a sneak attack and made use of the terrain to launch a sudden attack, the 5-star army wouldn't be able to withstand it. Especially in a situation where they were severely lacking in rations, the more they moved, the more they would consume. It was because of this that Yang Qindong placed all his hopes on Tianhu's world's first cavalry army. If they couldn't break through this time, then they would have to retreat without accomplishing anything. How could Tianhu not understand this? After being a high-ranking officer for so many years, he still had some foresight. Thus, he was even more clear about the importance of this mission. After returning to the camp, he called for the 4 division commanders. The 5 of them discussed for more than 2 hours and finally came up with the most reliable method of attack. In summary, they had to take down Akamo City and lure the enemy back for reinforcements. This would open up a path and opportunity for the 5-star army's main force on the Eastern Front. As long as they could join forces with the 5-star army on the Eastern Front, it would be equivalent to having a stable route for the transportation of rations. They could also use this route to continuously send in supplies needed for war. Regarding this point, Yang Qindong had already sent a telegram to the various armies on the Eastern Front 25 days ago to let them prepare. 4 division commanders, the 6th young master is watching us. The entire army is watching us. Next, it's time for the world's first cavalry army to perform. Remember, this time, not only do we have to take down Akamo City, we also have to open up a safe route to the east. This mission will be handed over to the 2nd and 3rd Division. Now, as the commander, I give you the authority to act as you see fit. If you encounter anyone who doesn't cooperate, you can end it on your own. You can kill without mercy and don't have to worry about anyone coming after you. If necessary, you can build a few more temples to warn others. As he spoke, Tianhu's body emitted a murderous aura. Chapter 1510. 2nd Division's Commander Lu Duo and 3rd Division's Commander Hubo stood up and stood at attention. Rest assured, Commander. We guarantee that we will complete the mission. We promise to open the passage as soon as possible and meet up with our main forces in the east. Very good. Everyone go and prepare. Jianghu nodded in satisfaction. He was full of confidence in his cavalry. 4 hours after the meeting, more than 40,000 5-star army cavalrymen set off. They were only 12 kilometers away from their target. They did not take any measures to conceal themselves. After the order was given, the 1st Division's commander Taimu took the lead and attacked. For the world's #1 cavalry army, who were proficient in archery and horse riding, a distance of 12 li was nothing. They could guarantee that even if they were discovered by the enemy, they would not give the enemy any time to prepare for defense. In Akamo City. Inside a huge yurt, this was Janabek Khan's residence. Compared to the previous days, his emotions were much more stable. This was because Mandu Latu had stopped the 5-star army's attack on the Western Front. It was already the beginning of July. They only needed to hold on for 2 more months before winter arrived. If the 5-star army still couldn't build up their defenses, then they could only retreat. This would give them time to rest and recuperate. Although it was not a victory since they could stop the 5-star army's first attack, who could guarantee that they would not be able to stop the second? This at least gave the Khanate's coalition army, which had been losing, hope. It had a strong effect on the army's morale. This was something that could not be bought with money. Thinking that it would not be long before the 5-star army left dejectedly, Janabek Khan had a smile on his face even when he was sleeping. And all of this disappeared because of the sudden tremors that came from the ground. The smile would never appear again. Report. Enemy attack. Enemy attack. The scouts on the periphery finally discovered the traces of the 5-star army. However, just as Tianhu had predicted, the speed of the 5-star army's cavalry was simply too fast. By the time the scout returned with the news, the vanguard of the 1st Division had already arrived outside the city. They were only a stone's throw away from the earth wall. The scout's shout attracted the counterattack of the 500 Kazakh cavalrymen who were on night duty. They all came to the back of the earthen wall and used it as cover to shoot arrows outside. But to the brave warriors of the world's #1 cavalry army who were like ferocious tigers descending from the mountains, they were completely ignored. In addition, in the dark night, vision was limited to begin with. Many arrows were released, but they were all off target. Not many soldiers of the 5-star army were injured. The earthen walls were destroyed by the prepared soldiers of the 5-star army using the huge logs they brought. Without the protection of the earthen wall, the entire city of Akamo was defenseless in front of the 5-star army soldiers. Soon after, the sound of countless armored cavalrymen could be heard. At this time, Janabek Khan had just crawled out of his bed. When he heard the news of the 5-star army's attack from his personal guards, his eyes widened in disbelief. How could the 5-star army appear here? The Ili Empire to the east and the Timur Empire to the west. How did the 5-star army bypass them and arrive in front of him? What was going on? Could it be that these cavalrymen flew here? With all kinds of puzzlement in his heart, Janabek Khan escaped under the protection of his personal guards 15 minutes before the arrival of the 5-star army. Because he left in a hurry, he did not have time to take many things with him. Even his blanket still had a trace of warmth. The 1st Division's commander, Taimur, was the first to rush into the Khan's tent. When he saw that there was no one there, he strode forward and touched the blanket. He frowned and said, "It's still warm. What a pity." Even the great Khan had fled without any resistance or counterattack, not to mention the Kazakh cavalry in the city. There were less than 10,000 of them, and in less than 2 hours of fighting in front of the more than 40,000 ferocious soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army, they either died, fled, or surrendered. In the end, the 80,000 Mongolian civilians in the city were all captured and enslaved by the 5-star army. The battle went very smoothly. When Tianhu walked into the Khan's tent, he was in high spirits. As he walked, he ordered, "Immediately find all the food in the city. Let the 2nd Division and the 3rd Division eat first. After that, let them set out the day after tomorrow. We must take advantage of the time when the enemy is unprepared to kill our way out. Also, call the 1st Division and the 4th Division over. We also need to discuss the issue of defending the city. This earthen wall is really not sturdy. We must immediately rebuild it and use everything we can, including the civilians in the city, to dig trenches. No matter what, before the army arrives, we must be nailed here like a nail." When he said this, Tianhu's eyes were filled with determination. If the surprise attack on Akmo was the first step to success, then defending this place was the second step. It was also the most difficult step. Tian, who could even imagine that once the enemy knew that there was such a nail in their heart, they would not be able to resist pulling it out. When Akmo fell, Janibek Khan only managed to escape with less than 1,000 Kazakh cavalry. When the news began to spread, Mandulato, who heard the news, immediately smashed the desk in front of him and shouted angrily, "Trash, a bunch of trash." After venting his anger, Mandulato calmed down and felt the threat. He did not know how the five-star army had bypassed his front line. He had to find a way to eliminate them. He absolutely could not tolerate a fierce tiger lying by his side. He also could not allow the five-star army on the east and west to converge. Otherwise, it would be the beginning of a disaster. At this moment, Mandulato finally understood that the crazy and brainless attacks of the fifth-star army in the past half a month were not to cover up those killers, but to attract his attention so that the cavalry of the fifth-star army could pass right under his nose. It had to be said that even though he was very careful, he was still careless and fell into the five-star army's trap. Or it could be said that he fell into the trap of King Wunan of Damyang. Men, send out 80,000 cavalry. No matter what, we must capture Akmo City and kill all the five-star army's cavalry there. Kill them all. After enduring for so long, Mandulato finally decided to reveal his fangs. His first target was the world's first cavalry army that was nailed into Akmo City like a nail. Once this nail was pulled out, the next target would be the 20,000-strong five-star army's cavalry that was about to attack from behind and join the five-star army on the east front. Mandulato did not believe that it was only 20,000 cavalry. Could they really overturn the heavens? The same news also spread to the five-star army's camp on the west front. At this moment, everyone knew that the sixth young master's actions had such a deep meaning. Some of the officers who had complained could not help but feel ashamed. For this reason, many officers actually knelt in front of the main tent and apologized to Yang Qindong in person. In response, Yang Qindong only arranged for Beta Persei to come forward and admonish them. He had already investigated and found that these complaining officers had the intention of thinking for the army. No one had any ulterior motives because of this. This did not cross his bottom line, so naturally he would not punish them too harshly. This was probably the effect of Gray's death. Although there were quite a few people who suspected that Yang Qindong was the culprit behind Gray's death, after considering that he had indeed done something that was not allowed by military discipline, coupled with his frightening arrogance in the later stages of his life, such a person's death was not worth pitying. Furthermore, although Gray had died, he had died fighting for the five-star army in name. As a result, his family had received quite a bit of compensation. With this, they had both money and face, and no one would step forward to seek justice for them. On the contrary, what everyone needed to consider was that they could not easily make mistakes in their work in the future. For this reason, many officers who joined the army later went to check the military discipline of the five-star army. This was very gratifying. Ili County. King Bali's face was full of worry, and it lingered for a long time. Ever since his prime minister, Syed Ali Alip, had suddenly disappeared, all the pressure had been placed on him. When the military matters, the local matters, and the pressure exerted by some nobles all came pressing down on him, he quickly had a lot of white hair on his head and he looked much older. Regardless of whether it was day or night, he dealt with all kinds of matters. However, not only did he not manage to deal with them well, there were more and more of them. This was especially so when he heard that the five-star army had entered his territory from the Kazakh Khanate. He felt that the pressure was about to completely crush him to the ground. Originally, he thought that with the appearance of the Timur Empire's great Khan, the Khanates would temporarily be united, and more Khanate alliance cavalry would enter his territory. His country would be saved. However, from the looks of it, he had underestimated the five-star army. Or, it could be said that he had overestimated the so-called invincible Khanate alliance. Truly a bunch of trash. He had the same sigh as Mandula Tuesday. When he heard that the five-star army only had 20,000 cavalrymen, they had chased Khan Jani Erb all over the place, causing them to lose most of their territory in a short period of time. When the five-star army finally arrived behind him, King Bali wanted to kill this so-called great Khan of the Kazakh Khanate. What was the point of having a great Khan who could not even stop the 20,000 cavalrymen of the five-star army? Chapter 15:11. Sighs were sighs and curses were curses. He knew that the 5-star army on the Eastern Front was responding to the 20,000 cavalrymen. They were trying to open up a path by attacking from both sides. The 5-star army on the Eastern Front was attacking ferociously, and their momentum was even more powerful than a few days ago. The 5-star army on the Eastern Front was responding to the 20,000 cavalrymen. They were trying to open up a path by attacking from both sides. There are hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen here. Do you think you can open it just because you want to? Bao Lide's face was filled with confidence when he thought of the 10-kilometer-long trench outside the city that was enough to stop the 5-star army's attack. It was also because of this trench that the 5-star Legion's cavalry couldn't charge forward at all, which was why they were able to hold off the enemy for so long. Bao Lide was confident that he would be able to hold off the main force of the 5-star Legion this time. As long as he could hold off this wave of attacks, he believed that the other Kaganates wouldn't just ignore the 20,000 enemy cavalry that appeared behind them. Bao Lide was confident that he could defend Ali Mali City. However, what he didn't know was that one of his generals, Wu Liji, was secretly meeting with an old friend. At this moment he was struggling with whether to surrender or not. When Wu Liji's old friend, dressed in a black robe, appeared in his residence, the great general was given a huge fright. After the shock, he walked over with a face full of joy. "Prime Minister, where have you been these past few years? We missed you so much." That's right, the person who came was Prime Minister Ali Pu. It had been almost 4 years since Yang Qindong had sent people to rob him. During this time, he had been under the surveillance of intelligence personnel. He had been to Yangxia's Chichen City, Shishir, and other provinces. It could be said that he had been moving around without stopping. These years of traveling had greatly broadened his horizons. Just like what Yang Qindong had said when he met him secretly, his so-called governance was just child's play. Under his governance, the nobles would still be high and mighty, and the common people would still live a life without hunger. Apu had once scoffed at this, thinking that Yang Qindong was just a braggart. At least from what he knew of history, there had never been any nation or country that could eliminate the privileges of the rich and powerful and allow all the ordinary people to live a prosperous life. For example, they did not lack food, clothes, and houses. In his opinion, no one could do this. Anyone who could make 50% of the people live such a life would be a great ruler. If he could make 60% of the people reach this standard, then he would be a great emperor. If he could make 70% of the people reach this standard, then he would not even dare to think about it. However, after visiting for 4 years, he found that Yang Qindong was not just bragging. Instead, he really did what he said. Although the common people's wealth did not reach 100%, it was at least 80%. Moreover, this percentage was still increasing year by year. In other words, as long as they were hard-working people, dutiful people, and people who were willing to work hard, they would be able to live a prosperous life. This was something that he didn't even dare to think about before. Now, someone had actually realized it and even let him see it. This had greatly affected him. How he wished that the common people of his country could also live such a life. That way, even if he died immediately, it would be worth it. But in his heart, he knew very well that this was impossible. Not to mention other things, just the privileges of the rich and powerful were something that no one could abolish. If someone really did this, they would be overthrown by the rich and powerful. Even if he and the king worked together, they would not be able to do it. Even so, a bold idea appeared in his mind. If he could not do it, he might as well give it to someone else, such as the leader of Yangxia, Yang Qindong. After having this idea, Apu quickly shook his head, wanting to suppress it. Wasn't this the same as selling out his country? Wasn't this the same as giving his country to someone else? This was the act of a traitor. Apu wanted to suppress this sudden thought, but after it appeared, he discovered that it wasn't something he could suppress even if he wanted to. This was especially so when he visited other provinces under Yangxia. He saw many common people who had migrated from other places and lived with them. When he asked them whether they still remembered where they were from, whether they wanted to return to their homeland, or whether they wanted to rebuild their country, the answers he received were the same. Of course I want to go home. After all, it's my homeland. But if I have to live a life where I can't eat or wear clothes, I'd rather stay here. Here my family and I lived a good life. We didn't have to worry about our next meal, nor did we have to worry about our wealth being swallowed by the rich and powerful. We also didn't have to worry about our own safety and whether or not enemies would suddenly attack. This is the life I want. As for the past, forget about it. Just treat it as a memory. That's right, it's a painful memory. When this answer did not come from one person, but from 10 people, at least 9.5 gave the same answer. Apu knew that the common people's eyes were clear, and Yang Qindong's actions were correct. If it was wrong, why would the common people speak up for him? Why would he receive the support of the common people? Why would the common people be truly satisfied to the point where they would forget their homeland and their country? After slowly going from not understanding to understanding, Apu began to believe in his thoughts. Yang Qindong was correct, and this method could also be applied to his country. Although the price he had to pay was the loss of his royal authority, compared to the common people being able to live a better life, it was all worth it. Back then, wasn't his wish to let the common people live a better life? For this, he swore that he would sacrifice everything, including himself. Since there was such an opportunity, what was he waiting for? 4 years later, Apu finally thought it through and sent a telegram to Yang Qindong. He explained his views and thoughts and was willing to pay any price. He wanted to do something for this matter. Yang Qindong was naturally very happy that Apu was able to think this through. This was also one of the important reasons why he wanted to capture Apu. He immediately arranged for people to escort Apu to the eastern front lines, preparing to return. After receiving the order, the commander of the foreign army, Bai Shuang, received the order and Apu appeared in front of Wu Liji. When he entered the city, even though Apu was in a carriage, he could still see the current situation of the common people through the window. Compared to 4 years ago, the common people here were even more bitter. They were all thin and sallow, and some could even be blown away by a gust of wind. Their eyes were empty and lifeless, as if they were walking corpses. They had no aspirations, no dreams, and no expectations for tomorrow. Compared to the common people of Yangxia, they were all full of energy, and their bodies were broad and strong. They were like people from 2 different worlds. This also strengthened Apu's thoughts. He also hoped that the common people here could enjoy the same treatment as the common people of the other provinces of Yangxia. That's right, in Yang Qindong's words, it was called liberation. It was liberation, it had to be liberation. With this firm thought, Apu met Wu Liji and saw the other party's enthusiasm. Speaking of which, for Wu Liji to have his current status, it was naturally because of King Boride's approval, but it was more because of Apu's recommendation and promotion. In a sense, he was the one who recognized Wu Liji. It was for this reason that the first person Apu chose to meet was Wu Liji. He firmly believed that even if Wu Liji didn't agree with his point of view, he wouldn't betray him. Seeing Wu Liji's excited expression, Apu reached out and patted him on the shoulder. "General Wu Liji, is there a safe place? I have something to say to you in private." "Chem? Oh, there is, please come with me." Wu Liji's expression instantly became much more solemn. He already had a vague feeling in his heart. The two soon appeared in a secret room in the residence. Without permission, no one was allowed to approach this place. Otherwise, Wu Liji's personal guards would kill them for threatening the general's safety. In the quiet secret room, the two sat facing each other. After Wu Liji poured a cup of tea, Apu slowly opened his mouth and gave a general account of his 4 years of disappearance. Wu Liji listened attentively. He was very curious about the 5-star army. He also wanted to see what kind of power could cultivate such a powerful cavalry. Could it be that the Han people were so powerful that they were invincible? Were they so powerful that they changed their strategy? All of this was explained by Apu's words. It turned out that the relationship between Wu Nanwang of the Great Ming Dynasty and the Great Ming Dynasty was not subordinate to each other. Instead, he belonged to an emerging force. No wonder this was the case. In a sense, Yang Qindong was equivalent to a founding monarch. He belonged to a new power that was constantly developing and expanding based on the Great Ming's borders. In Yangxia's power, there were no so-called nobles and there were no restraints. Once they wanted to do something, they could wholeheartedly devote themselves to it and didn't need to think too much. Just this alone was something that the other old powers couldn't compare to. Just the existence of nobles and nobles had dragged down countless people who wanted to rise but couldn't. To make a simple analogy, power and wealth were not concentrated. Most of the land was in the hands of a few influential people, and the lives of the common people were miserable. In such an environment, no matter how good one's ideas were, it would be very difficult to turn them into reality. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.